It is 4 minutes after 10. And the first message of the day says, bring back Suella Braverman. I hope you've missed me as much as I have missed you. And I derive no pleasure whatsoever from returning during a period of such upset and turmoil. And once again, we find ourselves deriving absolutely no pleasure from having been among the tiny, perhaps minority of people who feared that this sort of thing was on the horizon. I think of all the shows that we've dedicated to what the end game would be, or where the kind of rhetoric deployed by prominent public figures in the media and indeed in politics, where it would lead. And the reason why we know where it would lead on this programme is because we do, perhaps not as much as we used to, but we do talk to people who would be adjacent to the sort of characters that we saw this weekend trying to burn down hotels containing asylum seekers, setting fire to libraries, looting shops, attacking police officers, launching themselves at individuals who looked different from them with venomous fury. We have spoken to some of these people over the years, perhaps not the people who would actually pull on a balaclava helmet and go out to terrorise a community, in the case of Southport, already reeling from the grim murders of three little girls, one of whom, of course, was the daughter of immigrants. That's something I'm surprised to see has been somewhat overlooked in an awful lot of the coverage. You have the son of people born elsewhere embarking upon a murderous frenzy, and one of his victims is the daughter of people born elsewhere, but the problem apparently is people born elsewhere. Perhaps we can riddle that one a little bit later. I'm going to talk to you, I think, first about a few of the phone calls we've taken over the years, because I've been on a journey. Dreadful word, that. When I started in this job about 20 years ago, I wasn't particularly engaged in these matters. I was familiar with sort of the National Front. My dad had covered it for the Daily Telegraph in the 1970s and the 1980s. Nick Griffin was bubbling around. I think Farage was still a bit of a fringe figure. And I never really knew that this kind of thing was bubbling under the surface of our society all the time. I knew about the Notting Hill race riots, particularly after I moved to West London and got involved in Carnival. And by got involved in Carnival, I mean got on one on an annual basis. I didn't have any particular role to play or any volunteer type status. But I found out more about it. I have a little bit of history. I know as a Catholic that the Gordon riots in, I think, the 18th century were dedicated to the belief that Catholics were somehow responsible for all the country's ills. I know that Jewish people have been on the end of that particular accusation for centuries in almost all corners of the world. Latterly, in this country, Muslims have come in for the blame whenever anything awful happened. And indeed, they somehow got the blame when the Welsh-born Christian son of two people born in Rwanda committed terrible murders. The speed with which people were keen to blame Muslims, partly as a consequence of liars on social media, something else we've talked about a lot on this programme, was almost supersonic. And they never back down, really, these people. They can't. Their lives, their entire careers, of course, have been built upon inciting precisely the sort of violence that we saw this weekend. And it will be minutes, if they haven't done it already, before they start claiming that they warned against it. The people who said we need more robust responses, we need to be tougher on people, we need to get our country back. That's a particularly vicious phrase that I think we'll dig into a little bit later. They've incited these scenes. Make no mistake, calling people, human beings, seeking asylum, having fled war zones and tragedy, calling them illegals, the most dehumanizing of terms, having lecterns, displaying the phrase, stop the boats, public figures calling for people crossing the channel in flimsy dinghies to be sort of left to drown, people in Parliament now who have subscribed to some of the grimmest rhetoric I can ever remember hearing. We know, everybody knows it. I tell you what, something that possibly gets missed, they know. You can tell by the way they wriggle. I think Farage this morning is trying to blame it on the policing of Black Lives Matter protests, which of course happened during lockdown and did not contain anything like the attacks upon entirely innocent people that we've seen over the course of this weekend. They know, and they can't. Where are they going to go? What are they going to do? People who've been feeding bile into the public bloodstream for decades about people born in other countries. It doesn't matter that they marry them, have children with them, speak foreign with them. It doesn't matter. It works. It's a business model. It's a career plan. It's a path to profit. And this is what happens. This is what happens. This is terrorism. These are pogroms. These are attacks upon wholly innocent people for the crime of having been born somewhere else, or having different coloured skin from you, or having different coloured skin from the people who are attacking them. So I'm going to run through a few things that have happened to me over the years. There's a moment many years ago. I don't know whether you remember it. I think it was before we started clipping things. John in Hounslow. And I've been looking at Hounslow today, bizarrely, because it's my home borough where plenty of asylum seekers are housed, including in leafy Chiswick, where I used to live. But Hounslow published a report at the end of last year describing the unacceptable conditions that asylum seekers face when they are put up in hotels. We may have a little look at that later. But I always remember John in Hounslow because it was the conversation that they always tell you that they're not allowed to have. He literally said to me on the programme, we're going back, 15 years maybe, I think? Was it in this building or the old building? I can't remember. He said, you can't say what you want in this country about immigration without being called a racist. I said, go on, mate, say it. I promise I won't call you a racist. And he said, OK, Hounslow's full of Pakistanis and they smell. Well, I think, actually, no, he said, Hounslow's full of Pakistanis. I said, well, what's wrong with that? He goes, they smell. And I thought, oh, Lord. This was in the days before the programme was sort of sometimes making the news rather than simply reporting it. So I felt a little bit of a frisson of fear that possibly this invitation to him to say whatever he wanted to say about immigration was something I'd come to regret. And I said, what do they smell of, John? And he said, curry. I thought, what the hell do I say now? So a long pause on the programme, kind of pause that gives Keith the heebie-jeebies because he thinks the emergency tape might kick in. And it wasn't me being clever. It was me desperately thinking what question to ask him next. They smell of curry, do they? So I said, do you like curry, John? And he said, yes, James. A couple of years later, I took a call from a woman who was furious about immigration, very much a sort of UKIP creation, and she told me, and again I still wasn't massively engaged in these kind of issues, she told me that immigrants got given free shops where she lived, free shops, or £20,000 each to open shops. And I remember thinking, that can't be right, can it? Maybe there's a sort of kernel of truth in it. Maybe there's a kind of scheme somewhere to help people from particularly difficult backgrounds set themselves up in. I could say maybe there's a grant. And I didn't have the facts at my fingertips. I didn't let it slide exactly, but I asked her for proof. I asked her for some sort of evidence, and of course there wasn't any. And then I looked into it afterwards, and it was complete nonsense. But she believed it. She believed it, that people born overseas were getting a better deal than she was. They were getting lots of free stuff. And then not long ago, I think it was possibly only last year, was it? We took a call from someone who at the beginning sounded quite sensible, said she shared a lot of my views. Sometimes my radar bleeps a bit and I think this is slightly not as it initially appears. And then she told me that her friends in the council had told her that all the immigrants got free cars, all the asylum seekers got free cars. And I thought, well, how do you prove that wrong? Especially if it's all over your Facebook feed, if you're reading this every day, if your feed is full of it. How do you prove it wrong? How do you know? How do you demonstrate to someone? They see a brown face driving a car, which of course was grounds for getting attacked in some towns in this country this weekend. A brown face behind the wheel of a car, that was sufficient grounds for physical attacks, vicious, violent physical attacks. But don't call them far right, whatever you do. Just concerned citizens trying to kick the living daylights out of people who have done absolutely nothing wrong. attacking homes, attacking shops, attacking libraries, attacking hotels, attacking citizens' advice bureaus in some of the parts of the country where citizens need advice more than they do almost anywhere else. But don't call them 5-star. Don't call them far right. So you can't prove that they haven't got free cars. You can give all the evidence you want, but people choose to believe it. And then there was a call that you may remember. It wasn't that long ago. A fella convinced, absolutely adamant, nowhere near London, lived at the other end of the country, but he knew for a fact that Sadiq Khan had introduced Sharia law in 2 London boroughs and was very keen to do it again. We did it live on air. We spoke to him live on air and showed him the error that he had made, showed him the source of the lie that he had believed. In fact, the original post described Shakira law, which is, it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. And we showed him in real time, live on the radio, this is not true. So give me another reason for holding the views that you hold. And he hadn't got anything, but he didn't go away. He didn't go away having abandoned those views. So you build an opinion about Islam, immigration, refugees, asylum seekers. You build an opinion based on falsehoods and lies, exaggerations and embellishments. And when you are shown that what you believe is not true, you don't change your mind. You don't change your mind at all. I don't know how you deal with that. And then the hotels. I've seen some clips that have popped up on this radio station in the last couple of weeks about asylum seekers apparently being in 4-star and 5-star hotels. They're just not. They are just not. Farage started that as well, driving around with his Fisher-Price binoculars, filming himself going into buildings that used to be hotels and are now asylum centres, and claiming that they were receiving 4-star treatment. You imagine checking in to a 4-star hotel and finding out that the 5 people in the next room reheating their frozen meals in a microwave that was the level of service you were going to get. It's simply not true. Things that are not true. And yet people believe them. And that's why today we've got a problem. We've got a problem because you don't know how to tell the difference between the people who believe things that are not true and the people who just don't care. They can't wait for the opportunity to throw burning torches at hotels full of foreigners. They can't wait for the opportunity to help themselves to mobile phones and Croc shoes and trainers. They're just not there for any even vaguely racist or even political reasons. But they march alongside the people who are. And how do you tell the difference? How many of these people are susceptible to the truth? How many are susceptible to the facts? How many of these people, when they claim that living in a Holiday Inn Express is somehow the lap of luxury, how many of them, when they discover the reality of these scenarios, will go, actually, do you know what? Maybe that's not the thing I should be angriest about today. How much money, for example, was funneled into the pockets of Tory party donors during the PPE scandals? Yeah, I don't care about that. They can buy yachts, but if there's a fella over there getting some crumpets for free, then I'm bloody furious because he's brown. I don't know how many can be brought back to something that once represented normality in this country. My local council, the London Borough of Hounslow, did a report at the end of last year into what life was like in these sorts of hotels. And the findings were pretty damning. They looked at the mental health impacts of the cramped living conditions, the poor food nutrition, the lack of privacy, the lack of health care, the lack of mother and baby provision, and much, much more. The cost of dealing with some of the physical and mental health consequences of this will dwarf the cost of the original accommodation. The safeguarding issues are off the charts. Depression, suicide ideation, gestational diabetes due to poor nutrition, risk of domestic and or sexual abuse. One case study highlighted a 4-year-old child who'd become so withdrawn that they couldn't leave the hotel room. The health professionals consulted suggested the child was suffering at the age of 4 from clinical depression. And what happened to people like that this weekend? They looked out of the window of their substandard unhealthy accommodation, and they saw people drawing their fingers across their throat in one case, or lobbing burning missiles in others, screaming abuse, trying to block doors. Trying to block doors because they fear that their identity is being eroded. They fear that British values are under threat. And the phrase I think that best explains what happened this weekend is the phrase that Lee Anderson took to spouting relatively recently after arriving in his third political party, having been a Labour politician and a Conservative politician and now a Reform UK Limited politician. A party, by the way, in which 20% of its serving MPs have served prison time for assaulting a British woman. 1 in 5 MPs in Nigel Farage's party has served prison time for assaulting a British woman. Farage himself, of course, married to an immigrant, which makes his children the children of immigrants, just like all the children of immigrants that we're supposed to be hating on at the moment. That phrase, I want my country back, we never talked about it on the show. And we probably should have done. The reason why we didn't talk about it on the show was because it's a bit of a Pandora's box, isn't it? What do you mean you want your country back? I think that phrase gives permission to people, possibly people who are a bit hard of thinking, if you prefer to see it that way. But it gives permission to people to take back what they think has been taken from them. It hasn't been taken from them. There's a Labour MP, I'll play you the clip shortly. There's a Labour MP who was complaining about asylum seekers being housed in a Holiday Inn Express in Tamworth, I think in her first speech to the House of Commons. And a Holiday Inn Express in Tamworth was attacked by racists this weekend. It was the subject of another pogrom, another attempt to terrorise or expel people based entirely upon their ethnicity or their origins. I mentioned that she's from the Labour Party because I don't think many people are blameless in the creation of the environment in which this stuff can happen. Some of them are obvious. Tommy Ten Names, the Spectator magazine, the Sun, the Daily Mail, Nigel Farage, Suella Braverman. Some of them are obvious, some of them less so. A Labour MP complaining because the people of Tamworth want their Holiday Inn back, she said. How many people check into the Holiday Inn that is in the town where they actually live on a regular basis? I don't know. Maybe I'm leading a desiccated life, not checking into the Holiday Inn in Brentford on a regular basis. We want our hotel back. 22 minutes after 10. So here we are. What I don't know is this. What I don't know is what you do with the people who say, I obviously abhor what's been done, but these people have got valid concerns. What do you do with them? The people who are doing the rioting, the people who are attempting to terrorise entirely innocent people, they go to jail, ideally for a very long time. But what do you do with the people who, are they in good faith? When they say, the ones who say, I disapprove of the tactics, but they've got a point. Because they haven't got a point. They believe that people are living in the lap of luxury, that immigrants get free shops and free cars, and that Sadiq Khan is introducing Shakira law, and that these hotels are on a par with Claridge's, and a lap of luxury is available to absolutely all of them. So they don't have a point. But what do you do with the people who say that they do? How robust should we be with the people in public life who have given permission to these pogromists, who have given permission to these racists, the people who have said, go and get your country back? Because if you say, I want my country back, you are saying, go and get it. Go on, go and get it. I think Anderson claimed that a travel lodge in his own constituency was full of asylum seekers and then had to backtrack humiliatingly when it emerged that actually it was a bunch of nurses who'd checked in for a little holiday, a little break from looking after us. Foreign-looking, mind, of course. That's a crucial point. So is there such a thing as legitimate concerns in this case? And if there is, and I'm far from convinced that there are, if there are such a thing as legitimate concerns, what's the relationship between them and the rioters, between them and the potential killers, them and the pogromists, them and the race, the violent racists, the looters? What's the relationship between them? And I mean, listen, I'm overloading you with questions today. This always happens when I've been away for a while, but rarely do I return to such scenes as the ones that we've all witnessed in the last couple of days. How do we have this conversation? So I'm pretty sure that this has happened because we've given too much space to the inciters. We've given too much space to the dividers. We've given too much space. We've given them season tickets on Question Time. We've given them their own television stations. We've given them newspaper columns and magazine columns. We've given them radio shows. And yet still they claim that they're marginalised or silenced. Still they claim that they're frozen out of public discourse, that their concerns are ignored, and therefore it is inevitable, if I disapprove, but it is inevitable that people are trying to burn down hotels containing children, innocent children. I don't know how you have that conversation. Because they're calling for more. We need more attention. We need more space. We need more television shows. We need more appearances on Question Time. I don't know that that's the right answer. I really don't. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Tell me how you think we should conduct this conversation. Do you think I'm going to stop talking today? It's 25 minutes after 10. What's the record, Keith? 27. Well, I don't feel like breaking it today. 28 after 10 is the time. It's supposed to be a phone-in show. And Liam has phoned in from Wath-upon-Dearne, which is, I think, in the Rotherham area. Liam, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. First-time caller, super nervous.
It's only me. It's only me.
Yeah. So yesterday, obviously I live in the Wath area where the hotel yesterday was attacked by, let's face it, people who were just committing crime, who were smashing things up just for the fun of it and some for racist reasons. But I think for me, whether it's empathy or something, I've lived in this area for all my years. I lived in the next town over in Mexborough. Used to go to the Shore Start that was there. And, I've seen the sort of, I guess you could call it rusting of the area over the last 20 years, especially over the last 14 years of the Tory party. And, the more they capitulate to the right, the immigrants or people of colour in general have been set up as a bit of a red herring, when I think, they're the ones who have been stripping the area, and, they pointed at the brown person to shout at, and everyone's believed it, and it's just super sad.
How likely is it that people you've knocked about with were in these crowds at the weekend? People that you've maybe worked with or gone to school with or something like that?
I think it's incredibly likely.
How do you process that? How do you?
It's just sadness, mainly. I think there's a lot of people there who are misinformed. I think the way that I was watching everything go down yesterday was through TikTok, and people were TikTok live streaming it and things. And it happened in two phases, really. At the start, there was a huge crowd of people waving flags and things like that.
Yeah.
And the chap who was filming the TikTok was like, "Where have you come from?" "Oh, I've come from here and here." And
right.
Everyone he spoke to was not from the local area at all.
They'd just come for a
terror. For a bit of a knees up and
How do you tell the difference between the pleasure seekers and the genuine? I mean, there's racism underpinning all of this behaviour, but I think you know what I mean. The ones that would turn up for an opportunity for violence and looting on any pretext, and the ones that really relish the opportunity to have a crack at asylum seekers or foreigners.
I don't really know, if I'm perfectly honest.
I don't think anyone does.
I was trying to decode it yesterday and trying to think it through, and I think, as I said, it happened in two stages. So the first stage was, I guess, what you could call sort of professional right-wing rioters, or whatever you want to say, who were turning up at these locations, whether it was Middlesbrough, Liverpool, or here in Wath, and just causing carnage and then leaving. and not having
so
to
they're
sweep up
the ones
rubble.
answering the calls of Tommy Ten Names and his mates from his sunbed in Cyprus. They're the ones that are turning up specifically with
100%.
intent, and then the word gets out that things are kicking off outside the Holiday Inn, and people are drawn, particularly when the weather is nice. I know that sounds trite, but it's a well-established trope.
Definitely.
People are then just drawn to the metaphorical and of course in this case actual heat.
And then I think the second stage of yesterday was once all the true racists, professional far right, whatever you want to call them, left.
Scum works for me, actually.
The people who were left were people who were just, as you said, sort of curious of the situation. You know, this area doesn't have a lot of activities to do, and so, you know, something this size going down, especially when Sky News and things like that turn up at your doorstep, it's curiosity that gets you. And I remember watching a TikTok yesterday, this was yesterday evening, and somebody says, "What are they writing about?" And somebody went, "I don't know, I'm just here to have fun." And I think that kind of sums up a lot.
I know it's an odd word to use, but for people worried about actual pogroms, of which we've seen at least 2 this weekend, that is almost reassuring, because the people you're describing are not there deliberately to attack people based entirely upon their ethnicity or their origins. They're there for the crack, as the Irish would say. A couple of things from Rotherham I'm sure you're aware of. Man in the crowd collapsed, so the rioters invited the police forward so that he could get medical attention from a police officer. And while he's being helped, the police line continued to be bombarded with logs and bottles. While I have you, Manvers Way, you probably know, do you, the A633? How many people actually live there? Because sometimes the cameras focus upon the violence and the flames and the fires and the hotels, but some people are waking up this morning and that's on their doorstep, right?
Yeah, 100%. You know, I'm waking up. There's an Aldi across from the hotel that I usually go to on a Monday morning. I know, super boring, but that's where I do my weekly shop. Yeah. And it looks like a war zone at the moment. And I think, as well, another point that I wanted to make is that I think it's a very vital time for Keir Starmer and his new government. Yes. He came out yesterday and he said thugs and all this kind of stuff, which is correct. These people are thugs and criminals. But I think they need to do a really good job of dividing who the professional, or professional is probably the wrong word, but the far right
opportunists people versus I don't know what word we need. Terrorists, I'd probably lead to, or quasi-terror. Opportunists versus terrorists. I don't know. I mean, you're right in the midst of it, so your opinion is worth more than mine. But I don't know at the moment how important that is. In
the local area, I've just seen sort of a nosedive of everything. I think people who have seen their jobs go up in smoke. You know, Manvers is a huge mining city town, and you know, there's no jobs, there's no prosperity, there's no opportunity in the area, and so, you know,
why not blame it on children? Children in the Holiday Inn, or adults? Exactly. I mean, whatever it may be. Liam, thank you, mate, and you take care of yourself. I sense we may talk again in the coming days. Although you have to hope that none of these scenes are repeated in towns like the one that Liam lives in. It is 10:34 and Amelia Cox has your rather late, my fault, headlines. At 10:38 is the time. It's been pointed out that at least one of the people that we've mentioned today is actually living in the lap of luxury at the moment, is enjoying the hospitality of a 4 or 5 star hotel, running to some £400 a night, I think, and that is Tommy Ten Names. No doubt crowdfunding soon for quotes, legal fees, end quotes, and living it up on somebody's shilling. 10:38 is the time. Adam's in Newcastle. Adam, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Hello. How are you doing?
I'm grand. What's on your mind?
So I work with the emergency services. Obviously, in the North East this weekend, we've seen riots in Sunderland, and we have an upcoming event on Saturday as well that's being organised over Facebook.
Right.
When I go out to people, when I see people, especially young men, I see a lot of disenfranchisement.
What does that mean?
So if you look at the areas, especially in the North East, a lot of mining's gone, a lot of shipyard work, steel work, things like that. A lot of manual labour jobs, factory work, all those different things. We have a huge swath of that population who now has no sort of push, no purpose. They have nothing there that they can sort of go towards. Education in the area has gone down. There's no support groups in the area. Things like youth clubs over the past 14 years have gone. Mm-hmm. So we've seen a large amount of people who are lonely, disenfranchised, upset, have no prospects, and they're looking for someone to blame. As a result, we're hearing people like Nigel Farage, Tommy Two Names, as you mentioned it, coming forward saying...
10 names, mate. Come on.
20 names, sorry, yeah. We're hearing people like that come forward and say, well,
blame them.
Someone to blame.
Blame them.
Yeah.
So the more, and in fact, 30p Lee's constituency is not in the northeast, but it is a former mining area. It is very much, in fact, I did a full disclosure with James Graham, the playwright, which came out while I was on holiday, which digs very deep into what that community is like and you know, what a compassionate and decent response to those sort of conditions looks like in James's case. But it's the same sort of territory. So when someone in public comes forward and says, I want my country back, they're speaking directly to people who are as you describe, and telling them that what has been taken from them has been taken by some Afghans in a Holiday Inn.
Absolutely. It's really.
How does
sad,
that bit
actually
work, though, do you think, honestly? Because there'll be loads of people listening to this who've been on their uppers, who are on their uppers now. Many people whose lives haven't turned out as they expected, and they wouldn't set fire to an asylum hostel in a billion years.
I think there's a lot of underlying anger. I especially see in my job. There's a lot of mental health crises going on at the moment.
Tell me about
There's a lot of people who are upset, who've got issues that haven't been addressed, who can't get support through medical services and things like that. And as a result, they're going to things like YouTube and Facebook and looking for answers. And the way the algorithms are set, the way that these things go up, are dragging people into these sort of rabbit holes.
How much time do you spend looking into that yourself? How much, I suppose the word would be research, because some of us stumble across it. If you've got a Twitter feed like mine, you can run the very real risk of getting buried in it. But it is probably not very widely understood, is it, how seductive these algorithms can be?
I grew up, over the years, I grew up under the Conservative government, and then as I was growing up, it was really easy to get sucked into videos of people in America who were saying, comedian owns the libs and makes libs cry and all that, and it was really easy. As soon as you start going into that, you then start going to the further things. And if you look at commentators like people like Andrew Tate, they talk about things like family values, they talk about getting a job and being supportive of people, and you get sort of drawn in by that. And then as you get drawn in by that, and it's like a comfort blanket, someone's talking directly to you, someone's looking after you, and then before you know it, you're starting to agree with the more extreme points on those sides. And we're seeing that a lot more, especially out in the community. We're seeing people who are, really getting sucked into these rabbit holes and these sort of echo chambers.
How do you get them out?
It
might not be a conversation for today, but it will probably be this week. How do you get them out? We had this, and people might snigger at this, but we had this a lot with the anti-vaxxers, similar conversations. Yeah. And actually, the crossover between the anti-vaxxers and the race rioters or their apologists is enormous. I don't know if it's quite a circle, but it's certainly a fat intersection in the Venn diagram.
I actually see it. Yeah, I see a lot of that with these similar people.
Yeah.
I see a lot of them bring up the scamdemic and different things, which is great when we're there and we're trying to help them.
Of course. They're public health professionals who are somehow part of a conspiracy to harm. It's like the police who, God forbid there's another attack in a nursery anytime soon. It's the police who are going to run in to that room.
Exactly.
And it's the police who are getting battered by these scumbags up and down the country at the moment. Do you fear for your own safety? Has it changed your...
There's a lot of we're getting a lot of emails about things that are going on at the moment. Bring your protective equipment, all these different things. Don't wear your uniform to work, and I'm proud of my job. I'm proud of what I do, and I want to be seen in my uniform. But you were saying about how do we get these people out? I think community. Is a big thing, and community support is a big thing. We've lost things like youth centres. We've lost community groups. We've lost a lot of sort of things there where people can meet these people who are on their own, who are sort of chronically alone, and they can talk to actual real people in real life. And if you talk to someone in real life, there's sort of consequences to what you say. There's no nuance online. There's no sort of, you can't put an accent on things. You can't say things in a certain way. It's black and white. It's in the word.
And even if you try to, people would deliberately misinterpret it or misrepresent you. It's a tough one, isn't it? And final question for you, one that I asked Liam as well. A, how do you tell? But B, how important is the distinction between people who've got caught up in it? So I use a word like scum. Right, It's not a nice word. It's a word I reserve for the people I have seen actually launching attacks on the police, or maybe even worse, launching the fire bombs at the hotels containing children, containing wholly innocent, blameless people. That word applies to them. It's not going to apply to everybody who's turned up at these locales, even some people who, much to their own surprise, find themselves stepping through the window of a Greggs and helping themselves to a free sausage roll, just as we saw during the 2011 riots in London. So how do you tell the difference, and how important is it, the difference, given that they're all contributors to the apocalypses that we're seeing on our streets?
I think it's really hard to tell the difference within the actual event itself. People get drawn into things. It's almost like a football match, really. It's sort of mob rule. People get carried away with it. But I think it's the engagement. It's having the discussion with people and talking to them about what are your issues, what are your concerns, what's going on in your life, and how can we then help that. And if they're receptive to that, if they're understanding of that, if they say to you, well, actually, I'm the first one in the family who can't afford a house. I don't have a family because I can't get a house. I can't get a good job because I'm, in debt from student loans, or I'm in debt from various different things. The only thing I can do is drink and take drugs and things like that. It's talking to them and saying, right, well, what are the ways that we can help with that? What's the support we can give with that?
And explaining it's got absolutely nothing to do with asylum seekers or refugees.
And we also need to point the finger at people who have escalated this, who have used this for their own means.
As you speak, I'm thinking of that vote, the Leave.eu video that just showed an almost exclusively white faces in A&E going, people getting their hips sorted by tea time, everybody being told all you need to do is vote to leave the European Union and you'll never have any waiting lists ever again. And you don't have to be you don't have to be a scumbag to fall for that kind of seduction, do you?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, mate. And thank you for everything you do. I mean, you say you're proud of the uniform despite currently being told not to wear it. We'd be lost without people like you. Absolutely lost. No, you take care. It's 10:46. 10:48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. One thing I'd just add, I know I'm talking a lot today, but I think you know why. About the social media stuff that you may not be aware of, but whenever I block someone on Twitter, I always have a look at their account first, because you don't want to block someone by accident. Denying someone access to my tweets is, that's an act of cruelty. Obviously, it's a terrible loss for people who enjoy wit and wisdom. But I always have a little look first, and what I've noticed in the last couple of years is the number of accounts that are dedicated exclusively to posting footage of crimes being committed by people of colour. Exclusively. As if white people never commit crimes at all. And they're always accompanied by comments like religion of peace or multiculturalism at work. So when our previous caller was talking about rabbit holes, that idea, because what you need to do is create the idea in the minds of people that innocent people are guilty. That's the only way you can achieve these sort of goals. That's the only way you can mobilize pogroms. Innocent people are guilty. We've seen it recently in Gaza, haven't we? We've seen claims from supporters of Benjamin Netanyahu, both inside and outside his cabinet, that there are no innocent people in Gaza. So in order to green light the worst possible human behavior, man's inhumanity to man, you need to create the idea in people's heads that innocent people are guilty, so that any asylum seeker somehow bears responsibility for crimes committed by somebody who is not an asylum seeker but happens to be black with Rwandan parents. The breakdown of what at first glance appear to be bleeding obvious distinctions is crucial to this whole project. And it happens. It happens in real time. You see it. There's a commentator called Matt Goodwin who used to be a writer. I think he's one of Farage's biographers. He talks about the murderer being the son of immigrants from Rwanda. There's no doubt in my mind what that phraseology is designed to achieve. That is evidence of his culpability, evidence of his guilt. Therefore, all children of immigrants, brackets from Rwanda, close brackets, are somehow inferior, are somehow other, are somehow to be feared or to be suspicious of. Shashank Joshi, who's a brilliant journalist, defence editor at The Economist, picked up on that quote and wrote, "The son of immigrants. For these people like Goodwin, we will never really be British." And it's not hard to find people who won't even argue with that. So no, you're right, you're not really British, you're brown. And that's when the word indigenous comes into the conversation. So film after film after film after film after film of people all over the world with darker skin than mine committing crimes designed to create the idea that they are all criminals. They are all criminals. Just listen, I can't do this quite off the top of my head, but Daily Mail front pages over the last few years. Fury over plot to let 1.5 million Turks into Britain. 4,000 murderers and rapists we can't throw out. Prime Minister, UK Muslims helping jihadis. Migrant numbers hit new records. Migrants, how many more can we take? Calais, send in the army. True toll of mass migration on UK life. 4 out of 5 migrants aren't Syrians. We're from Europe, let us in. 100,000 illegals stopped at the UK border. 1 million more migrants are on their way. The swarm on our streets. Foreign workers get 3 and 4 new jobs. Migrants spark housing crisis. Britain's broken borders. PM, why we must not take 3,000 migrant children. The idea that these people have been groomed, radicalised. It's not about things happening in the darkness. It's happening on your newsstand. It's happening on your television. It's happening on your favourite radio station. It's happening almost everywhere. But that attempt to blame completely innocent people for the actions of guilty people is absolutely crucial to understanding all of this. And occasionally they say the quiet bit out loud. They say the bit that they probably shouldn't say publicly by accident, and they let the cat out of the bag. I'll provide you with a couple of examples of that later in today's programme. But back to the phones. Beth is in Manchester. Beth, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you for talking to me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for talking to me.
I'm a nurse in one of the most deprived areas in Manchester. Just what I've seen from these riots by the people who were protesting to, quote, want their country back, it's just so sad.
Yeah. What does that mean to you, that phrase? Because Lee Anderson uses it all the time now, and I've never quite dug into what we think he means. Maybe beyond the wit of man to work out what he thinks he means, but what do we think he means?
If I'm being completely honest, I think that he means that he doesn't like to see a face that is non-white. I'm
open to other interpretations if people want to provide them. But when someone says I want my country back, who do they feel? I mean, what is the figure now? 80%, 85% white? I don't know. But who does he feel that has taken it from him? I can't think of a better analysis either. But that's not why you rang in. Tell me more about your world.
So I work with some of the most disadvantaged families in Manchester. I'm really proud to work with them, and I think a lot of this is fear, but which comes from ignorance because they've not educated themselves. I've worked alongside the Muslim community. There's a really strong Afro-Caribbean community, Somalian, Polish, and all of these people make up communities, and they are in their own way fantastic. And I think that the ignorance is coming from listening to people like Nigel Farage, Katie Hopkins, Tommy Robinson, who's got the luxury of directing people from his sunbed in Tenerife, and nobody's clocked on.
That's not fair, actually. That's not fair, Beth. He's in Ayia Napa.
Oh, sorry. But nobody's kind of holding these people accountable. They're stalking these riots, these hatred marches, and if people went into the communities, visited their local mosque, they'll come across some of the kindest people they've ever met. They'll be welcomed in for a cup of tea. I think there was imams in Liverpool welcoming people, saying, come and talk to me. Don't riot. Come and have a conversation with me. And it's just so incredibly sad that people feel that they need to cause violence instead of going and having an adult conversation, because I just don't think this solves anything.
Well, of course it doesn't. Although for some of the people you describe, it's a very lucrative business model after they've run out of other career opportunities. How do we draw the distinction, if it matters, between people who get caught up in the moment and people who are responding to the clarion calls of the characters that you've just referred to?
I think it's really difficult to. I mean, especially on social media, you can't stop. So I saw a video from Casey Hopkins putting out this Arabic sounding name, which literally translated to my apartment. There is no such name in Arabic, but yet it was whipped round Twitter at a rate that is unbelievable, and people just...
It's a great piece in the Times at the weekend, looking at where that might have come from. It appeared to either begin or certainly one of the very early disseminators of it was someone who managed to achieve a sort of form of celebrity on those weird new television channels by being an anti-vaxxer, by being a prominent anti-vaxxer. I think her name is Bernie Spofforth, and that notion that putting out complete nonsense about it being an asylum seeker on an MI6 watch list or something like that, I think almost certainly ignited some of the violence and some of the horrors that we've seen on our streets over the course of the last weekend. And then, of course, Beth, as you know, they called themselves the Patriots while attacking our police, burning our shops, looting our stores, setting fire to British hotels on British streets. They're the Patriots. That's the mad bit, isn't it? That's the bit where the connection between the opportunists and the terrorists is I think, probably important to make.
I think in recent times I have especially sort of seen racism ramp up a lot. And
I think we all have. And yet they keep telling us it's not racist at all. It's legitimate concerns. Don't call them far right. They're concerned citizens. Well, what are they concerned about? People of a different race. Here's an example of what I was telling you about when they accidentally let the truth out. I don't know how many listeners, or particularly younger listeners, will be familiar with Kelvin Mackenzie, a disgraced former editor of The Sun who was responsible for maligning the memories of the people killed in the Hillsborough disaster in the worst imaginable way. For me, a significant milestone on the decline of the UK media since Rupert Murdoch bought that newspaper. And he talks of Keir Starmer. He says he doesn't understand. Remember that the murders in Southport were committed by someone born in Britain, okay? A Christian by all accounts. And oddly, when that fact emerged, in direct contradiction to the stuff that was tweeted by people like that Spofforth woman I mentioned, that they didn't suddenly all change their plans and target churches instead of mosques. They carried on attacking mosques. But Mackenzie wrote that Keir Starmer doesn't understand that away from his protected world, ordinary people associate the murder of innocent children with the arrival of illegal immigrants, sort of presumably accidentally giving away the fact that blatant racist lies are absolutely intrinsic to their entire grift. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. It occurred to me when we were talking to Liam, who described his normal Monday morning involving a visit to the Aldi opposite the hotel, the Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham. It occurred to me that there are three types of people who gravitate towards the kind of trouble that we saw in various corners of the country this weekend. There are rioters themselves, some of whom will be motivated by far-right bile and bigotry, some of whom will be opportunists up for a scrap or the crack or whatever you prefer to call it. And then there are the police or the emergency services who have little choice but to gravitate towards the trouble, the better to protect the rest of us from its ramifications and consequences. The attacks on the police remain something that is particularly hard to unravel, given that when murders occur, it is the police who will rush in and on the murderer. And then the third category of people, it occurred to me, was journalists. And the journalist whose coverage I've found most compelling since, while I was both on holiday and since I got back, is Tom Witherow of The Times, who was in Rotherham last night outside that hotel. He's a news and special projects reporter there. And he joins me now. I don't want to be sensationalist, Tom, but I do wonder, particularly reading your reportage and looking at your Twitter feed, which moments shocked you most, if that's a fair question?
Morning, James. Well, you're absolutely right that the attacks on police are just unbelievable. I mean, if you talk to locals who live in the quite well-to-do estate that borders the hotel where the migrants live, they are saying these are officers. They've got their own families, got their own kids. They do not deserve this. They don't get paid enough to start their shift at 12 p.m. I've just seen on Twitter one of the officers posting. He said he finished at 6 a.m. this morning. So he's worked round the clock to keep that community and the hotel safe. And
for his trouble, he runs the risk of a battering and endures a bombardment from people who presumably don't live anywhere near the hotel in question.
Absolutely. I mean, when I left at 10 p.m, they were still shifting riot officers in and out of the front lines where people were still making trouble. And, just looking at the guys who are sitting down on the sides, having a break, having some water, taking their heavy riot gear off, they look exhausted. Forces are being spread around the country, trying to spot trouble as it picks up. And, they're mentally drained and physically drained.
So they tried to burn the hotel. I saw one photograph or some footage that suggested they tried to block the doors of the hotel with burning detritus. They failed, but they caused untold damage, and that's physical. That's infrastructural damage. You got in to the building, I think, where about 10 rioters had infiltrated. You got in and spoke to some of the people who had been terrorised by the whole experience. Yeah,
that's right. So there was a moment where police appeared to lose control and windows were smashed into the dining room of the hotel, and a emergency door was smashed down, and that was where a bin lit up with bits of dry grass and cardboard and so on was thrown in through that door to try and light up the stairwell, obviously also blocking the emergency exit.
Right.
While migrants, of course, probably wouldn't be very minded to run outside if there was a fire anyway, because there's a marauding mob out there. And then, 10 of the rioters went through the corridors. They were shouting obscenities at the migrants. One said that he was hit, but not seriously injured. Before the police regained control, they were using dogs and mounted officers to get the situation back under control.
How you mentioned a brief loss of control. How close to chaos did things get? Because police is a finite resource, really, until they bust people in from elsewhere. In a sense, I suppose, the warnings that are provided by the plans work in the police's favour as much as the rioters.
Yeah, I think I'm not an expert on riot policing, although I have done some training with the Met Police in Gravesend as a journalist, so I know a little bit about it. But I think the intention when these protests start, and they do start peaceful, and I did speak to peaceful protesters, genuinely people who were local, they didn't like the migrant hotel being there, and they were out to have their voice heard. Is that the police will start off with quite a softer presence. So they won't have, hundreds of people in riot gear, because that just provides a target. And that softer presence didn't work yesterday. There was a counter-protest that the police had to then shoo away because they were drawing trouble from what became the rioters.
I see.
And then once those counter-protesters were moved off, the rioters turned their attention onto the hotel itself. Did they manage to quell the chaos? No, it was chaos. And the photo it's been used across all newspapers, absolutely a superb photo from a photojournalism colleague who was standing on the shoulders of the police while they were being attacked with huge wooden planks. Extraordinary photo.
It is. That's Joel Goodman, isn't it? It's
Joel Goodman, yeah. He obviously,
haunting image.
Had no care for his own safety as he took that photo, because he wouldn't have the same gear as the police did. But it just shows, what the police face. These are people, really angry, pumped up men with 10-foot planks trying to batter them.
And children, you reported.
Yeah, that was children in the summer holidays probably do get bored and have nothing to do. But what was extraordinary last night is it seemed like families, dads were sending their kids forward to go and attack the police. That is an extraordinary scene. It's one thing for kids to be lobbing a couple of pebbles, but to see parents sending forward, just extraordinary.
Finally, Tom, what's on the road ahead? Do we know? How much do we know about what else may be on the agenda? Over
the weekend, we have seen escalation. There's no doubt that day by day, we've me and journalistic colleagues have been travelling around the north. I was at the protest, the riot in Southport, and then a protest outside a mosque in Liverpool, and then yesterday, obviously Rotherham, Blackpool on Sunday. Day by day, it's getting more serious. What we're picking up, and this is running on the Times live blog of events this week, on social media. One of the Telegram groups involved in setting up that Southport riot last Tuesday has listed 39 targets across the country and called for protests on Wednesday night. They appear to be immigration law offices and immigration support centres. We're obviously not listing the name of the Telegram group or the targets, but that just shows how things can escalate. This group had 150 members last week. It's now got 12,000.
Right.
And the language in there is, not to be mentioned on the radio. It's disgusting, racist, fascist language, and it's scary, isn't it? I mean, we just don't know where it's going to go this week.
Well, I'm speaking from the comfort of a studio. You're out there, as indeed is your colleague. You mentioned running personal risk by getting some of those powerful photographs. Do you fear for your own safety, Tom?
Well, with training and the right gear, and when needed, a safe distance, journalists are reasonably safe. It's the police that really don't deserve this. These are young officers. They, my understanding from my training that I did in Gravesend was that they volunteer to take on this additional role as riot police. Obviously, their day jobs are different. They might be beat bobbies or other forms of policing. But when the call comes, as it did in 2011 after those horrendous, marauding riots across London, they take up the riot gear and do this. And with 2 days training was my understanding. So, these are just ordinary people, and they have to stand in the way. Us journalists can get out the way.
Nicely put. Tom Witherow, many thanks indeed. Tom, as I mentioned, news and special projects reporter at the Times, but also in the thick of this. It's a quick roundup of just the places he's visited in the last 72 hours, and a grim sense that this is indeed far from over. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you know something we haven't even mentioned is the absolute failure of politicians of all parties to address the necessity, never mind the desirability of immigration. So that would be, if you like, economic immigration, people who we need to come here and work. Asylum seekers fit into both categories. We do our international responsibility, but also, of course, benefit from welcoming people into the country who will help us deal with demographic crisis and huge shortages in various sectors. But no politician has taken that upon themselves recently. And I just want to be clear that although people like Nigel Farage are obviously culpable when it comes to whipping up this sort of hatred, the people setting fire to asylum centres would tell you that. One of them turned up with a T-shirt outside, not one of the asylum seeker ones, but one of the protesters in London had a T-shirt that said Farage for Prime Minister and Tommy 10 names for Home Secretary. So, these people are under no illusions about how those two men are two sides of the same coin, one in a suit, one in Stone Island. And it's not just them. So this is where the Labour Party has work to do, because it was the MP for Tamworth, where I'm looking currently at footage provided by Richard Gaisford from Good Morning Britain of what happened to the Holiday Inn in Tamworth after these thugs managed to get in there. It followed this comment in the House of Commons from the Labour MP for Tamworth, a politician called Sarah Edwards.
In Tamworth, the Holiday Inn has been used for asylum purposes for years, and the simple reality is that residents want their hotel back. Tamworth benefits from local tourism, and as I have said before in this chamber, the Holiday Inn should be for holidays. I therefore welcome today's announcement that the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill includes plans to end asylum hotel use. It was great to host the then Shadow Home Secretary in Tamworth earlier this month to brief her on the situation, and I look forward to working with her in the coming weeks to discuss the issue in greater detail.
So you can't allow footballification to creep in at times like this. 30p Lee dances around the place, spreading misinformation about a hotel in his own constituency and banging on about how he wants his country back without ever explaining quite what that means. But there's a Labour MP who recognises or believes that pragmatic politics, or that there are votes to be had in essentially doxing the residents of that Holiday Inn Express, essentially standing up in the House of Commons and telling people that that hotel is full of these people, while other forces are dedicated to whipping up hatred against those people. So, I mean, of all days, of all weeks, this is not one for tribalism or party politics. I wonder what Gary Lineker's up to today. Do you remember when he warned about what the consequence, or what he was reminded of when he heard some of the language being used by Suella Braverman? Suggested that it was reminiscent of 1930s Germany. And now we've got actual pogroms. It is 17 minutes after 11. If you follow me on Twitter, at Mr. James O.B., or indeed Tom, who we spoke to a moment ago, at Tom Witherow with a W, you'll see some of the footage that we were just referring to, including some video taken by an asylum seeker in the hotel, showing a masked man drawing his hand across his throat. So these are the people that we're supposed to be comfortable with. If you're saying, I want my country back. These are our people, are they? 30p, Lee? These are your people, are they? And the people in the hotels who've done absolutely nothing wrong, they're the people who've taken over. They're the people who've taken your country from you. Have I got that right? So it's the racist rioters, the pogromists, the people setting fire to hotels. They're the good guys. They're the patriots, and the people inside, because they come from other countries, they're the problem. They're the enemy. I mean that's the only analysis I can come up with at the moment. And of course, that use of the word illegals became a semantic inevitability when the Tories closed down all the safe routes here from recognised war zones. That little flash of patriotic pride we felt when the Ukrainian refugee scheme unfolded, albeit that most of the heavy lifting and hard work was left to citizens and civilians rather than politicians and government. It was extinguished pretty quickly, wasn't it? So you can only come here now via routes that they have made illegal. So regardless of how bona fide your application may be, you are by definition an illegal immigrant under their syntax, under their language. And then the Rwanda scheme, of course, was designed to deport people who were genuine asylum seekers, whose applications were successful. Their application to come and live in the United Kingdom with their family was successful, and they would have been deported to Rwanda. But hey-ho, good to see British values on display this weekend, wasn't it? Good to see British values back in the box seat. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. Back to the phone. Sue's in Greenwich. Sue, what would you like to say?
I'd just like to kind of talk about my experience as a Muslim woman, watching some of the events that have unfolded over the last few days.
Yes.
And it kind of reminds me of what it was like in the 80s when I was growing up. And, you know, the stories my father used to tell us as kids of the racism him and my mother experienced, which was very extreme. There was lots of fascism. And I can't believe, well, I can in some sense, but there's part of disbelief about the fact that we're here again. And I feel quite frightened for my daughter, who is, you know, preteen, dresses obviously as a Muslim,
right?
And kind of the concerns around allowing her out and about. She's at an age where, you know, she wants a bit more freedom, but I wouldn't even entertain it because of what's happening. I
mean, you've jumped the gun a bit. I'm moving into this territory a little later in the programme. There's a text that came in 4 minutes ago. It's not even somebody who would feel particularly targeted by dint of being Muslim, but Louise writes, we work near Wath upon Dun, where the hotel was set on fire. It was terrifying for the locals. Where I live is on a list of targets over the next week. I've got a young family and it's so scary. We have an overnight bag packed so that we can get out quickly if needed. So the number of innocent people who are going to be terrorised by what is happening is going to be huge. But I think for people who are visibly Muslim, like you and your daughter, the fear is going to be greatest.
It's going to be much greater, and there's a worry. I don't know whether it's just kind of anxiety when these situations happen, but every time something like this happens, I do start to think, is it viable to continue living in this country? I was born and raised here. I don't know any other country. I've never called anywhere else home except for the UK and predominantly London. But I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking, do I need to explore other options? And every time I think of an alternative, it doesn't seem viable because there's problems in every country. So where do you go?
You tell me.
I have no idea.
Why do you feel, and forgive me if this is a silly question, but I'm interested in your answer to it. 3 little girls, one of whom is the daughter of immigrants, are murdered by the son of an immigrant, British born, and by all accounts a Christian. Why has your community been targeted in this way? Why are they going after mosques?
I think I don't know. I think it's just any excuse. We're the most hated group on the planet at the moment. That's been the case for a long time. I don't think it's likely to change. In the 80s, it was. We were all packies. Yeah, that was what we grew up with. We had dinner ladies.
It's not a word I would use.
Yeah, and I get that, but I'm using it because I've got the right to.
Yep.
We had dinner ladies giving us less food than other white children in primary school. That's and that's like that's the subtle stuff. And there was far more. My mother would come home with her head cracked open because kids have been throwing stones because she's gone out to go and get some pints of milk for her children. This is what we lived through. And I feel like we're back. It's no longer about anyone that's brown. It's Muslims. And even though they got it wrong, they're still targeting the Muslims. And it's easy to hate on that group, and part of me does. And I think that's probably the feelings of most Muslims. But then there's the other side of me because of the work that I do, and I work with the job that I do means that I go into homes. So I work with a variety of different backgrounds and religions and so on and so forth. And so you get into conversations. You have to have empathy. The reality is they feel like they are marginalised. They feel that their community...
And people are constantly telling them that they are.
With this...
Constantly. I don't think it's possible to exaggerate how unending, how infinite that drip feed of "you are the real victims here, you are the real victims here," and that is precisely where I want my country back comes from. I want my country back comes from.
The lie that they've been told, which is going to be a stark reality check at some point, when this country, if it ever does become just a sea of white faces, when your government still don't do anything right by you, who have you got left to blame at that point? I think that might come at some point.
Well, I hope not, obviously, but I'm not going to patronise you with platitudes. I do remember that Leave.eu video that Farage and his mates put out, which essentially suggested that leaving the European Union would create within the NHS the sort of environment that you describe. And look, it didn't happen, but there he is moving on to a new target or claiming and disseminating new levels of bogus victimhood. What gives you hope? Don't say nothing.
I think if I bombard myself with social media, I feel really depressed.
Yeah.
But actually, day to day, I don't experience racism. Like I said, I live in central London. I'm around diversity. I'm going into people's homes. There's respect. There's mutual respect. So actually, on the streets, you don't feel it. And I think these things are amplified, and we can get kind of going down a rabbit hole when we're constantly watching videos
and thinking that this is everybody. I guess that the other area of hope or positivity is the number of people who turned out after the riots to clean up. People of every creed and colour turning out to help rebuild walls outside mosques or to clean up the mess that had been left behind by these knuckle-draggers. 26 minutes after 11. I use the word knuckle-draggers advisedly because the Daily Mail used it at the weekend. Incredibly, when you think about the effort they've put into turning the population at large, or the white population of this country, against people like the ones in the hotels in Tamworth and indeed in Rotherham that were set fire to by racists. And what I meant when I said we were going to move into this territory a little later was the question of direct impact. So I read you that tweet about somebody who is not going to be a particular target for these race riots. Farage riots, I think we should call them, shouldn't we? The Farage riots, we can say that. You are just living in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was interesting what Tom Witherow said about it being quite a middle-class estate where this hotel sits. So they've woken up this morning to see burning tyres, the detritus of appalling scenes right on their doorstep. So what would you do? Pack a bag in case they come back next week, get the children out? There was another one which really struck me from a fellow who used quite fruity language this morning on Twitter to describe his response to something that had happened to his son. It was, let me get it for you actually, because it's worth reading out properly. His son received a message from his friend, who is a Muslim boy. I mentioned this off the back of Sue's call. And his friend was telling him that he wouldn't be able to come to football this week. I'll read it to you. It's someone called Simon who's posted it. My son's friend just messaged him to say he can't play footy tomorrow as his dad fears he'll be attacked for being a Muslim. He was born in Britain, his dad was born in Britain, his granddad was born in Britain. And then the Anglo-Saxon language, which I find myself agreeing with wholeheartedly. And that's why I mentioned the comment by that Matt Goodwin character about the killer, the Southport killer being the son of Rwandan immigrants, as if that is an indicator of criminality. And then back to the Kelvin Mackenzie line about ordinary people associate the killing of children with illegal immigrants. I mean, I'm amazed he's done that publicly. Sod the truth. Oh, well, of course, he's got a very strong track record when it comes to his public relationship with the truth, infamous front page. But you're not supposed to admit out loud that you're part of a process designed to persuade people to blame the innocent for the actions of the guilty. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The question remains, really, what is the correct response to claims that these people have a point or that there are legitimate concerns? We haven't really found any yet. And yet the failure, of course, by successive political leaders to explain, or at least not even extol, but explain the benefits, the necessity of immigration. How many times did we say before I went away? They must know in private that when they're sitting around with all this rhetoric, they must know in private that the country's absolutely doomed if it doesn't attract labour, if it doesn't attract workers for the NHS, for the hospitality sector, for industry, for agriculture. Absolutely doomed. But publicly, they've got to claim that it's the scourge of the modern age. 11:30 is the time. Amelia Cox has your headlines. 33 minutes after 11. James writes, Ali in Worcestershire, many supporters of these rioters have rung into other LBC shows in the past week with vile views, trying to justify the violence and racism. I've noticed they haven't been ringing you. Do you think they lack evidence and know that their arguments will be taken apart? It might be that. I mean, we certainly don't get anything like the number of calls that we used to get from what I suppose you'd usually describe as Nigel Farage fans. But it's not a question of arguing with these people. It's a question of asking them really simple questions, like what is being eroded, or what has been taken from you, or what are the values that you feel are being undermined by the people in the hotel and upheld by the people setting fire to it? Or do you have any proof of these free cars that your friend in the council told you are being given to immigrants? So I used to argue. I think if I still came out fighty, I'd probably still get the calls, wouldn't I? Because it can always look like a score draw if you're all shouting at each other. But if you just calmly say, oh, really? Can you prove that's true? Like the fellow who rang in the other day I think it was actually from Hartlepool, was it? Where, of course, some of the rioting occurred. Adamant that Sadiq Khan had introduced Sharia law into London boroughs and was determined to do it again. You just say, "You sure that's true?" And then you say, "Where did you find that out? Where was the evidence? Where was the source? What's the source of that?" And you can just find it in real time. So I don't know. You'll have to ask other presenters why they don't do that. But for me, it's been a really helpful way in which to be respectfully sceptical about people telling me that Sadiq Khan wants to introduce Sharia law, or that asylum seekers get free cars, or that the hotels that they are accommodated in are the veritable lap of luxury. Another quick word, if you're just joining us on that question of what the hotels are actually like. This is from my neck of the woods. This is from the London borough of Hounslow. Some impacts, a report at the end of last year, have manifested into a range of challenging and potentially costly physical and mental health and safeguarding issues. These include depression, suicide ideation, gestational diabetes due to poor nutrition, and risk of domestic and or sexual abuse. One case study highlighted in the report tells of a 4-year-old child who has become so withdrawn that they refuse to leave the hotel room. Health professionals fear the child could be suffering from clinical depression. Presenting the report yesterday, this is back at the end of November of last year, Hounslow Council's lead member for migration and asylum and the cabinet member for regeneration and development, Councillor Tom Bruce, said the groundbreaking report highlights the unacceptable conditions that asylum seekers living in hotel accommodation face and the impact it is having on their health. Parents face feeding their families poor quality microwaved food in cramped conditions. It is often undercooked and even frozen when it arrives. How can that be? Surely they just use room service, don't they? That's what these people in Rotherham and Tamworth have been led to believe by people like Nigel Farage. Some of the hotels have no communal areas, meaning that people eat, sleep and live in their rooms. Most have lived like this for at least 6 months. Some have been in hotel rooms for 2 years. 74% of these claimants are granted refugee status or leave to remain in the UK. In other words, their claims are completely legitimate, and yet they will still be described as illegals. Many of the current asylum seekers living in hotels in Hounslow and across the country will be future citizens and our neighbours. It is our duty to help them so that they can enjoy productive lives, not just for themselves, but for society in general. It's not exactly complicated, is it? And yet it is apparently impossible to grasp for many thousands of people. Mayada is in Ealing. Mayada, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hello. Yes, I wanted to, as a refugee, I came to this country as a refugee in 1990. That was 34 years ago. And
thank you for the maths there, Mayada.
I'm just honestly, to tell you the truth, yes. Sometimes I think the problem, the issue is not basically no accountability for the people who stir up these problems. I don't blame the people who riot because they don't understand, and they are very, very easily taken advantage of. I gave an example to your producer when I spoke to her. We had a neighbor, yes, old person, lovely. He died 2-3 years ago. He was disabled. He had no one. Sometimes he would run out of money, so he didn't have even money for electricity. And we used to always, when I make food, we used to always send to him. Our neighbor, our Irish neighbor in front of us, the same. Between me and her, and I am not joking, and I am not exaggerating, we kept him alive.
Right.
Yeah? One day, when it was first, it was the referendum that he really shocked me when he told me that he wants to leave the EU. And then when it was voting time, he was telling me, I can't believe you want to vote for Labour. They're communist. They're socialist. And this guy reads. I have seen him. He reads books. He reads newspapers. And I would tell him, Steve, you're disabled. They sometimes cut your benefits. You can't eat. You don't have heating because you're disabled and you can't do anything about it. And you still support this government?
What did he say? What would he say then?
He was like, you don't understand. Labour want to bring all this immigrant in. And I just looked at him and I said, Steve, I am an immigrant.
I didn't mean you. He didn't mean you.
A refugee. And this is exactly what he would tell me. But no, you're different. I say, okay, how am I different? Okay, I might not be very dark, yeah?
Right.
But I am not English, okay? I am British, and James, I am not exaggerating when I tell you, Britain is my home, yeah? And what makes me sad is because I see my home being destroyed from within. Okay, this is not the Britain that I know. The Britain that I know is every single neighbor I know, they love each other and they help out each other. And I really didn't want to talk to anybody about this. I've been listening to this for the past week or so,
yes.
And I was feeling so helpless. But this morning, I was on Thread and I read a report about a guy called Robert Martin,
right,
who's going to take a small boat and goes to Gaza and tries to break the siege, basically. Yeah,
oh, good luck.
He wants to help, exactly. And I'm thinking, yes, these are the British people I know, that they will do anything to be human and to help. And we're all one hand, James. When COVID happened, we all took each other's phone number. We were doing shopping for each other. The old people, our neighbor had cancer. We were doing shopping for her. Every single one of us who was younger and able, we were doing stuff for each other. Nobody said, where you originally from?
So
yeah?
who do you hold responsible for curdling Steve's brains like that?
The newspapers that he used to read, the Daily Mail, the politicians. And I'm telling you, James, I felt the decline started with the anti-vaxxers and the COVID, and nobody questioned these people who print these crap. Nothing happened to them. I'm sorry.
Well, they've got their own TV stations now, of course.
Yes, and the GB TV. I honestly don't at all open it. But yesterday actually, I was on YouTube, and some of the clips they show, it's like the Britain they live in is completely different to our Britain. Okay, all right, I see.
So when
poverty plays a big role. Poverty does play a big role, because when you're poor, there are lots of things. Poor, alcoholics, sometimes drugs, and these people have no prospect. Yeah, but these people have no choice in their life sometimes, because generation after generation of mom and dad not very bright. But when we have Nigel Farage and that guy who escaped and he's sitting somewhere on holiday, and Katie Hopkins, these people know what they do. Why aren't they?
And their reach, I don't know. They're quite clever. I saw that Anjem Chowdhury got jailed for life while I was away. I don't know if you saw that. I used to see him as the other side of the coin of some of the characters that we've talked about today. It's a very clever understanding of precisely where the law began and ended, but his ego eventually overtook him. But the media played a role there as well, Mayada. I remember appearing on daytime television shows where he would come on and essentially a sort of terrorist recruiter. He'd come on and be booed by the audience on the Alan Titchmarsh show as if he was the Sheriff of Nottingham in a pantomime of Robin Hood. And that's an example of the media giving platforms to people who never should have received them. And unfortunately, the media, including sadly this parish, has given rather large platforms to at least two of the people that you've just mentioned in the context of the question of how these racist rioters ended up doing the things that they did and believing the things that they did. Mayada possibly more generous than I am when she holds the inciters exclusively responsible for the incitement and not the people who've actually done it, because there's loads of people who've been exposed to very similar influences who wouldn't dream of trying to set fire to a Holiday Inn full of foreigners. It is coming up to 11:45. After the break, we've talked to Saeed Awasi, the former co-chair, of course, of the Conservative Party, and someone who has warned often about the possible consequences of the direction of traffic taken by her party in particular and the country in general. And I think that issue of warnings is important because an awful lot of people who have offered invitations to violence, a lot of people who have incited the scenes that we've seen over the last few days will claim that they were warning about it when they were essentially calling for it. Oh, I warned you that this would happen when I said that if we don't start if we don't stop calling racists racist, things are going to get really ugly. Or if we don't start treating Muslims as if they were all second-class citizens or making life for them very, very difficult, then bad things are going to... So these people caused it. These people incited it. These are the Pied Pipers leading the rats that we saw in Rotherham and Tamworth and elsewhere. The only warnings worth listening to, the only warnings worthy of the name came from the people who explained what would happen if we carried on giving airtime to characters like Farage and Hopkins and Tommy Ten Names. Explained what would happen if we carried on allowing front pages like the Daily Mails and the Daily Expresses and the Daily Telegraphs to go unchecked and unchallenged. So they did it. I think someone's already mentioned Brexit today, but it's a rule on this programme that we have to bring Brexit into everything. But the Daily Mail in particular, Paul Dacre, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail, went all in on demonising immigrants just to get Brexit over the line. The last 2 weeks of front pages on the Daily Mail prior to the referendum were absolutely hideous. 1930s Germany and the rest of it. And it's as if they let the genie out of the bottle and now they don't know how to get it back in again. So they're running front pages about the knuckle draggers, but somehow seeking to blame it upon politicians who've been in power for about 3 weeks. Is it 3 weeks? 4 weeks? 14 years of having their own people in Downing Street. Everything kicks off and it's all the fault of the fellow who's only been there for 10 minutes. 11:46 is the time. It is 11:48 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the questions continue, and they are, I guess, a little bit more obvious, these questions, than usual. How have we ended up where we are, and how the hell did we get out of here? Saida Varsi is, of course, a former co-chair of the Conservative Party, Baroness Varsi, no less, and someone who I think it's fair to say, Saida, has been keeping track of some of the tides that have washed over us this weekend, rather longer than many people.
I have. Morning, James. I have. And, if you go back as far as 2011, when I first publicly spoke about this, when I was a member of the British Cabinet, when I said Islamophobia had passed the dinner table test, that this form of racism was found in the most respectable of settings, that it was being found in the corridors of power and in media rooms and in think tanks. And really, for over a decade now, coming up to 15 years, I've tracked how this has been enabled and emboldened and deliberately brought about. So I am not surprised that we are now seeing violence on our streets in the form of race riots.
What are the kind of the connections? Because we haven't seen riots like this for that entire period. So there's been some sort of escalation. There's been some sort of shift, if you like, that has happened in the last 12 months or possibly the last 12 days. Do we have any idea what that is?
No, I think it's been a much longer journey than that, James. I think if you go back to some of the language and campaigning that was used during Brexit, where we effectively greenlit much of this behaviour, which we were, before that would have considered to be completely unacceptable. The lies, the misinformation, which is the basis of all of this. Because in the end, if you look at what happened in Southport, even though we should never collectively hold any community responsible for the actions of somebody who may be from that community. But even if what we found in Southport was not even the case. This had no connections to Muslim communities, yet that was the misinformation that was put out. So I think the maligning and misrepresentation of Muslims, the demonization, the stereotyping of them, the stigmatizing of them. If you go as far back as Brexit and you look at all the misinformation during that campaign about how the Turks were coming to get us, was, and how all these marauding Turks were going to take over Britain if we didn't leave the European Union. I mean, it started with that. And because we mainstreamed this kind of bigotry and politicians played on it and used it for populist politics, and we've seen, for example, you and I have spoken about this before on your show, about people like Suella Braverman, the ex-Home Secretary, and others within the last Conservative administration, that there comes a point when effectively the message you're sending out subtly is, it's okay to use this language. It's okay to demonize the community. It's okay to then go the next step and see what we've seen on our streets. So this has been a very, very long time coming, and therefore it's going to be a long and painful, detailed job to try and make sure that Britain once more becomes at ease with itself. And that requires obviously a series of responses, including what we've seen already from Keir Starmer in relation to a strong legal response, but it's also going to require a huge amount of community cohesion building, which again, I have been calling for many, many years. I mean, in 2017, I wrote about this in my first book, where I basically said that, integration and cohesion is as important, national cohesion and national integration is as important as national security. And we need to have the same level of investment, support and apparatus in play, because cohesive integrated societies don't need large security departments, because actually the communities themselves make sure that they create a sense of ease where they live.
No pleasure in being proved right, Saida.
Absolutely none at all. And, James, I've just finished writing a second book in which I talk very, very personally as the granddaughter of two men who fought for Britain as part of our armed forces, as the daughter of a man who came to this country and worked in the mill towns and rebuilt this country, as someone who has served at the top table, and as someone who again now has a child back in uniform defending our country. It breaks my heart that I have people within the British Muslim community, hugely successful, integrated people, who are making plan Bs, who are basically saying this cannot be a place for our grandchildren. And I refuse to accept that. I refuse to accept that a country that my family have helped to keep safe and build and defend could not be a safe place for my grandchildren. And I think, therefore, we all have a responsibility to fight to keep Britain an inclusive, liberal democracy.
We've taken calls today from people from one Muslim woman in particular in precisely that position. And we will talk to you again when that book comes out. Finally, two questions, actually. The first is, how has this affected your relationship with former colleagues? Because, as you mentioned, you've been speaking out for the best part of a decade and a half, and it's fair to say that your position has been rather vindicated by events. But, do people leave the room when you come into it now who would once have been sitting next to you around the cabinet table?
Not necessarily. I think what has been the positive in this, and I always think, James, let's try and find the positive, is the number of colleagues who have since reached out to me, some publicly, some privately, who've said, I'm sorry, actually, you were right on this. I mean, actually, your colleague, Ian Dale, very publicly, not so long ago, said that I actually used to think Saida used to go on about this stuff, and I thought she was a bit over the top, but she's been absolutely right. And he reached out to me personally as well to say, look, you called this right. And I think the more of my colleagues who are prepared to say, let's pivot, let's change course. I'm not interested in them, I'm not interested in being right. I'm interested in us getting Britain right. And if that means my colleagues realise that this populist politics and this divisive politics that they've been engaged in is wrong, and they're going to change course, then that for me is all that any of us in this country could ask for.
Well, speaking of that, finally, when somebody like Lee Anderson, who not that long ago was in your party, talks about wanting his country back, what does he mean?
I have no idea, because this is our country. It's, like I said, it's a country that for at least 4 or 5 generations, my family have been defending and building and supporting. So I don't know what he means by he wants his country back. This is our country, and our country needs to be a place where people can go about their lives in safety and security, where the colour of your skin or the God that you pray to does not impact on how you are treated, and that in the end, that this is a liberal, inclusive democracy where everybody feels like they matter and they belong. In that, if Lee wants to stand alongside me and fight for that, I'm with him. But if what he means is that he has some perverse notion of what a Brit is, or what it means to be English, or what it means to be patriot, then I can give him huge examples of that from my family. I don't see them on the streets of Southport attacking police officers and setting places of worship alight.
No. Before you go, I have to ask, because people will expect me to, are you in an aviary or a theme park or a combination of both?
I am out with my grandbabies today in a theme park, trying to be a very good grandmother. But I'll try and keep the location of it offline, if that's all right.
I just wondered. There's some beautiful birdsong in the background as well, just morphing into the squeals of delighted children, which was a noise I think we could all enjoy on a day like today. Thank you, Saida Varsi, of course, former co-chair of the Conservative Party, and it is fair to say one of the people who has been warning about what would happen if the kind of rhetoric that has become commonplace in that period since 2010, 2011 were allowed to go unchecked, and unchecked it went. And here we are, not just places of worship coming under attack, but a library being burnt to the ground. Not something I suspect that's likely to trouble Lee Anderson unduly, but for people who read books and like learning and books, the burning of a library has horrible historical connotations. It's what fascists have done since time immemorial. And latterly, of course, this weekend, attacks upon hotels containing asylum seekers, which is, I think, fits the dictionary definition of a pogrom. Not a word I ever thought I would use on this programme in the context of my own country, I have to be honest. Anne's in Liverpool. Anne, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Anne.
Just firstly, what Baroness Farsi's just said has broken my heart, because it's kind of, it's come to fruition. Yeah. I live on quite a big thoroughfare in Liverpool called Queen's Drive, and just over some treatment for breast cancer. So I'm lying watching the Olympics Saturday night. My next door neighbours had some friends round, and about 10:30 I heard a bit of a kerfuffle outside, and I thought, oh God, my neighbours' friends must be leaving. And as I looked out the window, there was 8 lads, I'd say 8, fully dressed in black, hoods up, scarves over their mouths, black gloves on. And my first instinct was, oh my God, there's going to be a spate of burglaries. Because I'd been out with my sister in the day, we'd had a lovely day, and we kind of understood there was this undercurrent of rioting in Liverpool, but one of the most multicultural, tolerant cities in this country. And
that's a big moment, I think, in Liverpool's history, because you'd have chased them out. They wouldn't have come from within; they'd have come from without. But this time, they're Liverpudlians. You could hear the accents on social media. Yeah. It took me back, that knowing a little bit about your city's history.
Absolutely. And what we'd known was the imam of the biggest mosque in the city had made a beautiful speech and said, "Come and have a cup of tea with us. Don't fight with us." So we kind of known that in the city centre there'd been a bit, but a lot of it had been quite peaceful. So I'd seen these lads and I thought, what do we do? Do we phone the police? Anyway, within a few minutes, they dispersed, and I thought, oh God, okay. But my next door neighbours either side are both in their 80s. So I'm sitting here and I'm shaking. I'm thinking, what's going on? Within 15 minutes, James, all I could see outside my house was blue light. There was about 15 riot vans. There was the Matrix police, fire engines, ambulance. I'm getting upset now.
I know you are.
And within 20 minutes...
First time that's ever happened.
The helicopter was over the top. And the area where they rioted, County Road, is one of the most multicultural roads in the city. It's got all the eateries. So whatever food you want, there's a Caribbean supermarket, there's a Polish supermarket. It's somewhere that you kind of want to go on a Saturday night and get a kebab or a shawarma or, some sushi. And what had happened, and the big thing here is Spellow Library had only been open again, and it wasn't just a library, James. I really want to make this clear. This was a hub. It was one of the one-stop shops. I don't know if you know what they are, but Liverpool City Council has them for people who maybe don't have internet access. But if you've got a query about your council tax, you can physically go in. It's got computers and Wi-Fi for kids if they haven't got facilities at home to do their homework. It was a really good place. And
it's help for people who most need help, and it's gone.
Absolutely, and it's a really Yeah, and it's a really impoverished part of the city, but it's a very proud part of the city. You know, these people, you know, who live there, they keep the houses immaculate. You know, it's just that type of place. And to see it on, thank God, I mean, by 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and I'm not a big fan of Liverpool City Council, but they've done a phenomenal job with the clean-up team, getting as much done as possible. But to see the shops and businesses with all the windows boarded up now, they even tried to get into Home and Bargain, and I was thinking, what do you want? Shampoo and conditioner? I mean, Christ on a bike. You know, why are you
Anything.
trying to...
I saw someone carrying a Lush bag around, so he was after bath bombs.
Yeah, but there was a really sad situation where they did loot a shop, and they were trying to set the shop on fire, and the shop owner was saying, my kids are upstairs.
I think I read about that.
And I'm a mum.
Yeah.
My daughter came for dinner last night and just sobbed in my arms and said, Mum, what's going on? You know, and I think, as I say, as a very proud, I'm ex-military, you know, a very proud Scouse lady, I'm ashamed because these were local kids. And they were kids, and they were doing it for kicks and giggles, James.
Which is not reassuring. That's not quite the right word to use, but it's you know, they weren't sporting swastika tattoos or anything like that,
but
like some of the people we saw.
These will be the same kids in a fortnight cheering Mo Salah and the brown and the black players that play for Liverpool and Everton.
They might be cheering the Olympics this week. You never know.
Of course.
You know, it's a mad one, isn't it?
But to have them outside my house...
I'm sorry.
I mean, part of me wanted to get out and just shout, you know, you can imagine what I wanted to shout at them.
And I'm grateful for you not saying it live on the radio.
Because I'm not scared, James, and you know I'm not. I shouldn't be worried about my daughter going out and walking down the street on her own. But on Saturday night, this city turned to somewhere I've never seen and never experienced, and part of me's broken.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and so powerfully. And I wish there was something a little bit more upbeat or uplifting that I could say, but there isn't, because I recognise exactly what you describe. It is 3 minutes after 12, and it's actually, thanks to Anne, the next conversation we will have is about personal impact. I wondered when we began this morning whether that would be confined to people who would feel personally targeted, people perhaps wearing headscarves or people with brown skin, but we've now heard from 2 or 3 people who've got no particular ethnic reason or religious reason to be terrorised, not frightened, terrorised by these people, but who nonetheless are. So we'll move on to that after this. 8 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think it's worth listening to that again. It's only 25 seconds long. The Assistant Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police, Lindsay Butterfield, describing something that happened in Britain in 2024.
There was a particularly sickening moment when a wheelie bin was pushed against the hotel and set on fire, with the clear intent to cause serious harm to the residents and staff. It was known there were people residing and working in the hotel, but the mindless individuals responsible had absolutely no regard for their safety. It was ultimately a disgusting display of thuggery, continuing well into the evening.
I wonder whether she went far enough, actually, in those descriptions. Eddie's not happy. He says, I don't think I can bear to listen to any more of your biased drivel. Right, well, don't forget every single person who's rung into the show as well, Eddie. You seem not to be able to relate to or even understand the root cause of the current fury spilling out across Britain. Of course I understand it. I don't relate to it because it's absolute Rolex, mate. Your life isn't rubbish because of some asylum seeker staying in a holiday inn in Rotherham. It's rubbish for a whole heap of other reasons. But Eddie continues, it has been building for years. People have just snapped. Let's play that clip again, will you? Because this is what happens in Eddie's world when people snap.
There was a particularly sickening moment when a wheelie bin was pushed against the hotel and set on fire, with the clear intent to cause serious harm to the residents and staff. It was known there were people residing and working in the hotel, but the mindless individuals responsible had absolutely no regard for their safety. It was ultimately a disgusting display of thuggery, continuing well into the evening.
Working people, he tells us, suffering an extreme cost of living crisis feel pushed to one side when they see people from foreign shores treated in a way that they see as preferential and therefore unfair. Yeah, we've been talking about that all day, mate. The question you ask is, how is it preferential and unfair? And the best way to establish that is to look at what the claims are. So these are 4-star hotels, except they're not. They get free cars, except they don't. They get given grants to open shops, except that's not true. They are trying to introduce, or they have successfully introduced Sharia law in London boroughs, except that they haven't. So the point you're missing, Eddie, is that the things that you consider to be grounds for these kind of behaviours are not true. I spat my coffee out when I heard you blathering on about what are now termed as irregular migrants, complaining that their hotels aren't nice enough for them. No, you spat your coffee out when I read to you a report from Hounslow Borough Council into what the hotels where they house asylum seekers are like. It wasn't a question of complaints, it was a question of mental and physical health professionals going in and assessing what life was actually like for the people that you think are getting preferential treatment. So when the experts go in and describe the treatment these people receive, it proves that it is not preferential and therefore unfair, which makes a complete mockery of your entire position, which we both know is only designed to allow you to pretend that you're not a racist thug. Can you not in any way at all empathise with the plight of more firmly rooted citizens of this country? If they're telling me things that are true, of course I can, Eddie, but you're a liar. Of course the looting and violence is truly horrible. There's a butt coming, isn't there? Can you hear it? Can you hear the butt coming? Of course the looting and violence and attempted murder is truly horrible, and those particular individuals do need to be brought to book. Ready for it? I like big butts, I cannot lie. And here's Eddie's. But the broader issue here is being totally overlooked while the likes of you in your elitist echo chambers rattle on about the unruly minority of the protesters and gloss over the cause. 2 hours and 11 minutes on the cause, mate. And the cause is mugs like you, not just believing things that aren't true, but disseminating it as well. Start unpicking the real reasons behind all this, James. I just did. It's mugs like you, believing and disseminating things that aren't true, blaming your own pathetic existences on people that have got even less to show for their years upon this earth than you do. I suppose this won't get read out in full, but anyway, I had to say it. Good God, I thought you'd been wrong enough already, but the final line's an absolute zinger. Love to the family. Amin is in Peterborough. Amin, what would you like to say?
How you doing, James? I hope you're well. I was just talking to your producer there, and I was just saying with regards to like impact. I grew up in Cambridge in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know what racism was. I was one of two. My father's Pakistani, my mother's Indian.
Right.
So I was one of two brown people in the class. No issues. Never got called the P word. It wasn't even a thing. Islamophobia wasn't even a word when I was growing up, if that makes sense.
Of course it makes sense. I mean, to be fair, they're two different brands of hatred, aren't they? The P word, and then after September the 11th, I think, Islamophobia, the sense that you were somehow responsible for the atrocities of that day by dint of your association with people who claimed allegiance to the same religion.
Correct. I mean, I was just saying to your producer, two of my best mates, one of them's called Lawrence, the other one's called Benedict. Sleepovers, birthday parties, going out to play, religion, race, colour, creed, it never even come into the conversation.
Really?
Never, ever, ever come into the conversation. Or maybe I was too young to be aware of it. But then if there was an issue, I don't think I'd be sleeping around their houses for sleepovers on a Friday night, right?
No.
And they wouldn't sleep around mine either. My first language is English. I speak broken Punjabi because my mother and father prioritised English. They said, look, we live in England. They were born here as well. They go, that's your main language. So when I have, for example, visited Pakistan with my father, I'm actually a foreigner there as well. Because as soon as they hear me start speaking, they're like, oh, this guy's not from here. Do you see what I'm trying to say, right?
Mm.
So now, I'm in no man's land at the minute because what I was saying to your producer is since 2001, around that time, for obvious reasons, there was a lot of talk around terrorism, and there was the line become blurred, in my opinion. And I was saying to your producer, it's top down, it's not bottom up. So this fascism, racism, this kind of stuff, it starts with politicians, media, governmental spokespeople, people in power.
Of course it does. It's a mark of how bent everything is that I came on air this morning wondering whether it might be unhelpful or unhealthy to focus in on that. How do you ever deal with poison without going straight to the source?
Yeah, so it's top down, and I've noticed it more and more and more. And as I've got older, I'm speaking to people that I work with, and you'll get a question occasionally, do you guys really believe in this? And I'm like, no. You get extremists in all religions, but unfortunately, when it's a Muslim person, you'll see Muslim, grooming gang. There was a lot of hoo-ha about that, wasn't there? Rightly so, right? But you will never see Christian person or Jewish person commits. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
They're talking about the headlines. The Catholic Church came in for some specific criticism when it was found to have shielded legions of paedophiles and child abusers. But and of course the other lie is that the coverage of the grooming gangs that you refer to was somehow inadequate, when certainly on this programme we've been doing it since 2010. Andrew Norfolk in the Times led the absolute line, but there's a lot of money to be played by telling people that they're not being told the whole truth and then getting the truth out of the newspapers and pretending that you've somehow discovered it rather than having got it off the media. But that's Islamophobia, that's discrimination, that is a distinction. So how deep does it cut? How different do you feel today from how you felt either a fortnight ago or when you were growing up in Cambridge?
I would say it's sad to say, but I actually feel out of place.
For the first time ever?
I would say it's been gathering momentum since Brexit, because I took the time out to actually understand what was the main reasons behind Brexit, and I could only come to one or two simple conclusions. And it's a case now where me and my missus, we've got a young son, and my father used to tell me, he grew up in the 70s and 80s, and he used to tell me about how lucky I've got it, how things have changed. And I could not imagine. I used to be like, Dad, come on. Yeah, it couldn't have been like that, right? With a laugh and a joke. And now I'm actually, it's sad to say, I'm starting to actually, I've seen videos of just random people getting beaten up because of their colour.
Yes,
and it's like, hang on a minute, is this what my father was talking about in the 70s and 80s? And if this is happening now, my son's not even 1 year old. I don't want him to have the risk of walking down the street and before somebody, just because he's, I don't know, a bit brown or whatever, it's a different colour, there's a risk of attack. Last night, we got reports that there would be a march in Peterborough, Queensgate town centre around 7 o'clock. I spent the whole evening sat in my living room watching the CCTV, ready in case the march come past my house or something along that. I mean, it's not normal, right? Whether it's paranoia or, but from what I've seen on the media, it's a bit justified. Me and my partner are actually now considering like a backup plan, which is, I hope this doesn't happen. I mean, just to emphasize the point,
sure.
When it comes to like football, I support England. Even when it comes to cricket, which is like the holy grail of Pakistan sports, one of the good things we're great at, right? I go for England, like, because I'm born and bred here. That is, it's me. It's where I'm from. Do you know what I mean, right?
Of course I do.
But I feel like I'm having to.
It's not enough.
And don't get me wrong, but like when I speak to people, it's like I have to kind of overemphasize the fact that I'm British and overemphasize the fact that I'm all right and I'm not one of them and this and that and blah blah blah, and it just gets a bit
carry on like that. I mean, and you could end up Home Secretary. Oh, maybe not under this government. Maybe not under this government, but certainly under the last one.
No, I wouldn't want to do that.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for what you've shared. I'm sorry you're in a position to share it so powerfully, but it needs to be heard, not least by people like old Eddie. If he can get his head out of his backside for long enough to listen. Mind how you go. It's 12:18. It is 20 minutes after 12. And, listening to Anne talk about her, and she used the word shame, a lot of you pointing out she's got nothing to be ashamed of, but you can be ashamed of your city. You can be ashamed of your country. You can certainly be ashamed of your countrymen when you see them embarking upon the kind of behaviours that we witnessed this weekend. But she mentioned, of course, the Spello Library and its status as a one-stop shop where members of the community can get all sorts of help with all sorts of issues, not least internet access. And while she was talking, I think a burglar who targeted the library, I don't think he was responsible for setting fire to it, but he certainly was in there illegally, has appeared has appeared in court. He's a convicted burglar. And as he was led to the cells, he said to the judge, "Nice one, lad." He was found clearly something of a genius. He was found outside. Outside, the police found this defendant. He was wearing a balaclava and appeared to be profusely sweating. The crowd says this defendant was acting as a lookout. The balaclavas are an interesting thing, aren't they? When you think what these lads publicly say about face veils for women. A bit of an odd one there. I don't know. More example of hypocrisy? I've got a problem with people walking around with their faces covered if they are obviously up to no good. I've also got a smaller problem with people walking around with their faces covered even if they're not up to no good, because it makes, I don't know, it makes me uncomfortable. It makes me think that people are being oppressed. But if you had to pick between the two, criminals, burglars, arsonists, or completely peaceful women, I don't know what would be the hottest political potato. 22 after 12 is the time. I want to look now at personal impact. A number of people have been in touch today. Let me give you a couple of examples. And this isn't all from me. Some of it from the broader crucible of Twitter. I read you that one from the man whose son's friend had been in touch to say, "I'm not coming to football practice because my dad's worried I'll get attacked," and his son's friend is a Muslim. Here's something that you might not be aware of, but and I've got no reason to doubt it. If you read this out, please don't mention my name, just in case. I work in admissions for a UK university, and we're already getting emails from potential overseas students who want to cancel their places here because the UK is clearly not safe. So these patriots are now having a detrimental effect not only on our economy, but on our reputation abroad and the safety of our country. Well done, lads. At least 30p has got his country back, eh? And this is from Sasha, not my real name. I found myself feeling quite terrorised over the weekend with all of the news. My 6-year-old black son was supposed to be going on a trip with his boys' brigade this morning. Regretfully, I told the leader that he wouldn't be able to go today. I didn't reveal the real reason, but the truth is I'm petrified of him being on the receiving end of a reprisal attack a week following the murders in Southport when I would not be with him. Sad times, I know. Praying for normality soon. Again, please don't read out my name. I'm a Sikh, and my family are all baptised turban-wearing Sikhs. Every time anything terror-related or immigration-related comes up, there is a direct result aimed at us as a community, but seldom addressed as we're grouped in with Muslims. That's not an issue for me, as we stand in solidarity with anyone who is victimised in this way, but because we are so visible, it makes us easy targets. After 9/11, the first person to be killed in a retaliation attack was a Sikh man. The ignorance here is palpable, but the fear and attacks are very real. We live in a very white community, and it's never been an issue. We're heavily involved in local charities, helping to feed the homeless and provide free meals for children during school holidays. But the tension in the air today is very real. We're in constant contact with our loved ones to ensure safety and advice. It's exhausting, James, and causes so much unnecessary fear and stress. From Brexit to the language subsequently used by politicians and the media have totally fueled this. It's also very heartbreaking to discover that some friends and colleagues have these same sentiments. But, as I'm sure you would say, they don't mean you. Oh, and by the way, we were all born here. Sarah's in Cambridge. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about my personal impact. So Cambridge is pretty quiet. It's an affluent area. There hasn't been a lot, but I was very anxious yesterday, and today I've woken up incredibly angry. My nephew, who still lives in London, so I was brought up in London. I moved to Cambridge recently. My sister's told him not to go out for the next couple of weeks. He can't go and hang out with his friends because she's worried about him. He's just finished his GCSEs. He was looking forward to hanging out with his friends. He goes to a Catholic school, by the way. I'm Muslim. Yeah. And all his friends... most of his friends are white. He's got, good sort of amount of diversity in his school as well. And I'm livid. And I'm livid because this has been building for many, many years. Islamophobia is so rampant. It's so mainstreamed. And and you can see it. Even if you remember a few years ago, that Times headline about white Christian child put with Muslim family. Yeah.
And that went straight to a headline. It was on the news, the front pages of multiple newspapers for well over a week. The council, I think it was Tower Hamlets or whatever, had to spend thousands of pounds defending this decision. And you can only say that this would become a headline if your default position is that Muslims are dangerous, horrible people who are going to cannibalize this child or whatever. And it turns out that actually the source of this information was a troubled mother who was deemed unfit. And so where is the journalistic rigour that went into that before you published the story?
Well, you're absolutely right, and it's a very powerful example. Oddly, it's also an example of the regulator actually getting something right, because the Times was found to have distorted its coverage of that story. August 2017, after the girl was removed from her mother's care by Tower Hamlets Council in East London, and it was all nonsense, the idea that the foster carers had stopped her eating bacon and confused her by speaking Arabic and removed her crucifix. And a Times executive later acknowledged that the story had caused enormous offence. But you're talking about an ecosystem, aren't you? You're talking about an environment in which, at the time, a respectable newspaper could have fallen into such territory.
Exactly. The fact that it was a story at all just shows. I mean, even if she went to this family and they didn't give her bacon, why is that such a big deal? Yeah. She got an illness that is dependent on a regular prescription of bacon. Why is that even a story? Do you know what I mean? It's ridiculous. The whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. And then
that was 7 years ago. And that was 7 years ago. So yeah.
And then you talk about why is the police being targeted? Are you surprised? I mean,
I am a bit. Tell me I'm naive. No,
you absolutely are, because if you only need to go back a few months, you have the talk around the pro-Palestine marches. You have
Suella Braverman, essentially, according to police, being the reason for some of the attacks on them.
Take a deep breath before I say this. She was the Home Secretary who was saying this. Yeah. You know, that's Lee Anderson talking about Sadiq Khan handing London over to his Islamist mates. Yeah. You know, the very demonisation of these protests.
Blatant racism. Blatant,
exactly.
unapologetic racism.
Despite the fact that these protests were attended by Muslims amongst a lot of other people who are not Muslim.
Of course.
And the fact that a lot of the opinions that were shared in that march, or the feelings, have been endorsed by that well-known Islamist recently, the Archbishop of Canterbury. So, I mean, you know, like these opinions are not extremists, you know. These people were there, they were saying, we want peace, we want a ceasefire, this needs to happen. And they were termed hate marches. The police was called soft on lefties and soft on Muslims.
This two-tier thing has gathered momentum this week. I mean, you would need to know nothing about the recent history of this country to think that an ethnic minority gets an easier ride from British police than...
I mean, it's a joke.
I mean, it's beyond a joke. It's beyond a joke.
How many inquiries have been done that have shown that the police is institutionally racist?
Yeah.
You know, why didn't these guys protest that man who killed his ex-girlfriend, her mum and her sister with a crossbow? Why were there no riots about angry white men who kill women and their family for no reason? Why is there no complaint against Welsh TV presenters after Hugh Edwards? You know, the fact that the first thing we wanted to know after this terrible attack was, what colour was this attacker? Yeah. What religion is he? And the answer to stop all of these riots, apparently, was to just tell everyone early on he wasn't Muslim. So if he was, therefore this would all be justified, you know.
That's a horrible subtext. I'm glad you've picked up on it. I found myself wondering that this morning, is what would have happened if he had been? Because, I mean, it's hardly conceivable that the response could have been more violent and more unpleasant. And yet he wasn't a Muslim, he was a Christian, by all accounts.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's horrifying. I mean, for me, as I said, I'm angry. I came to the UK, I was about 7 or 8. I've lived in London almost all my life. And I've experienced racism now. I was brought up in relative privilege. And so I was, let's say, buffeted a little bit from the most extreme thing. Yes, I've had people shout "go home" and the N-word and whatnot on the street to me. But it wasn't a lot compared to, I think, people who who live in hotels, or even stories of people who have sort of moved into predominantly, say, white estates and have, like, dog waste put through their letterbox or bricks through their window or graffiti. People talk about communities not integrating, but it's a two-way street. I mean, would you, James, as a white man, want to live on a street with any of these people you've just seen rioting?
This is why the Lee Anderson question has run through the programme today. What is he talking about when he says he wants his country back? He wants more people like this living next door to him. He wants more people like this populating our schools and our hospitals and our businesses, or something different, something that is beyond my ken. Sarah, you've taken me beyond the news. Thank you, as with all of the calls today. I'm sorry that you're in a position to make such powerful observations, but there it is. I mean, the list of people who have contributed enormously, some explicitly, some implicitly, some deliberately, some subconsciously, to the creation of the ecosystem in which people can try to successfully set fire to hotels containing asylum seekers or libraries that are there to help the community that they claim to be protecting or representing. How does that ecosystem get created? It doesn't get created in a week or a month or a year, as Sarah and before her Saeeda Varsi have explained so powerfully. It's something that has been fermenting for well over a decade. 12:33 is the time. Tim Humphrey is here with your headlines. It is 36 minutes after 12, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is from January of this year. I've shared with you that report from Hounslow Council from November of last year into what the accommodation circumstances for asylum seekers are actually like. Here's something that probably wasn't picked up in your Auntie Doris's morning paper or indeed spread on your Uncle Keith's Facebook page. Médecins Sans Frontières and Doctors of the World UK have begun providing primary health care to men seeking asylum who are being held in a large-scale containment site in the former military barracks at Wethersfield in Essex. They've been assessing the physical and mental health needs of the residents since early September. While there is a medical centre providing primary health care on site, the men we've spoken to tell us their specific health needs are not being met for various reasons. And so charities that would normally be operating in war zones and scenes of natural and apocalyptic disasters are now working in Essex. But don't forget old Eddie telling us that it's the unfair treatment and the unfair advantages that these people receive that justifies and explains the anger that underpins the riots that we've seen all weekend. So what have you done differently? I hesitate to ask this question, but I think I should. What changes have you made? I'm not going to tell you that it's an overreaction to keep your child back from a boys' brigade weekend, because I'm white and I don't know how it feels when you see people who are the same colour as you being set upon in the street for no reason. Also footage that you may or may not have seen. I think Channel 4 News picked up of Asian men in one Midland city. It may have been Stoke, who were on a sort of similar revenge rampage, looking for white people to take out their anger on. So both behaviours utterly despicable. But as a white person, that is not something that is going to keep me awake at night. If I were of colour, if I were Muslim, if I were any of the things that I've spent years being told by people like Nigel Farage and Tommy Ten Names I should be fearful of, or somehow stealing my lunch or getting unfair treatment and special advantages, free cars, free shops, Sharia law, all of the above, 5-star hotels, 6-star, 7-star, 8-star hotels they stay in, 9-star hotels they stay in. If I was in any of those categories, then I'd probably feel differently. But what differences have you made? What reactions have you got? Hopefully in the short term, but as Tom Witherow of the Times warned us, there are plans for Wednesday of this week that include legal advice centres, because that's where all the bad stuff happens. Legal advice centres and similar. So what have you done? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Here's a good one. I nearly said, here's a good one from But I will. I won't say your name, even though it's quite a generic one, just in case. Afternoon, James. You ask about personal impacts of the current madness. I'd ask if your colleagues and newsreaders could stop referring to us as extra police officers when being deployed to deal with the violent disorder. We're not extra police officers. We're regular officers taken away from our normal duties or having our rest days cancelled to deal with these violent imbeciles. Please keep me anonymous on this one. I'm glad that I did. From a saddened and tired Met Police officer. Every time I call it Shakira Law, presuming you know the joke, I get a load of messages saying it's not Shakira Law, James. And then I get a load of messages saying, what's the song she did about the hips? The hips can't lie. The hips don't lie. The hips don't lie. And then when I say Sharia law, I get a bunch of messages from self-appointed comedians saying, don't you mean Shakira? So I wish, I part of me wishes I'd never opened up that avenue. Now, I really do. And it's funny, I mean, funny, not ha-ha, but Benjamin points out, it's funny how no churches were targeted when a young British man murdered 2 women and their mother in Hertfordshire. That's the point that Kelvin Mackenzie accidentally made in a tweet picked up by Alan Rusbridge, a former editor of The Guardian, is that they've successfully created the idea that when children are attacked, it is because of illegal immigrants. In this case, of course, we're not really talking about illegal immigrants. We're talking about asylum seekers, 70% of whom will have their applications approved. Being forced to make their way to this country via unsafe routes because the Tories shut all the safe ones. 12:41 is the time. Personal impact. What have you done differently as a consequence of what we have witnessed, if you're very unlucky, and what we have seen on screens, I suppose, if you're less unlucky in the last few days. David is back in Liverpool. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, mate. Good to speak to you.
What are you doing?
Right now I'm on my way to work.
Okay, sounded like I took you by surprise. What's on your mind, David?
No, not took me by surprise. I'm surprised about the weekend.
Yeah.
I'm from Liverpool, as you can probably tell, and I'm extremely proud of my city. I'm extremely proud to be from my city, and I always have a line that I say that anywhere in the world these people go to and choose to settle, and they choose my city, and I love that fact. And I'm worried that the events that happen on Saturday will make people not want to come here anymore, and that saddens me because it might be a wrong assumption, but I'm assuming most of the people who did cause the havoc on Saturday in Liverpool weren't really from them communities and weren't really from this city.
There were some Scouse accents in there, and I don't want to make too much of that, but I know a lot of people, a lot of your fellow Liverpudlians, your fellow Scousers have picked up on the fact that this is a significant change in Liverpool's attitude to fascism. They're joining in where once they'd have been chased out of town at 100 miles an hour.
And that's what saddens me.
Yeah,
that if there was actual Scousers in there and people who claim my city and call themselves Scousers, well, you've got the whole thing wrong, because being a Scouser is being accepting of everyone. No matter your race, your religion, where you're from, it doesn't matter if you're from Mars, you are welcome in my city as long as you contribute towards the city. And yeah, Liverpool, we've got the oldest Chinese community in Europe. We've got some of the best bars and restaurants purely because of the immigration and the multiculturalism in our city. And these people are now destroying that. And I don't need to tell you how bad the reputation Liverpool had in the 80s and the early 90s and things like that. And we have, I don't know if anyone ever had a meeting about it in Liverpool, but I think just as a collective, we all come together and thought, we're not having it. We don't want this reputation anymore.
We have, and picked up on it. I'm going to knock it on the head, David, because your phone line, I guess it's windy where you are on your way to work. It keeps zoning in and out. But I hope you feel you got your main point across. I don't know why I've got a soft spot for Liverpool. It's not a city I've ever lived in. At risk of alienating the entire town, I lived in Manchester. But there is something, I think, about Irish heritage and about that immigrant experience that informed the Liverpudlian attitude. Facing the sea in a town like Liverpool, not the sea at least, but being a big port, seems to have had a very different impact upon the urban character compared to the seaside towns, where the kind of popularity of clowns like Farage is is quite high. I don't know why. I'm interested in the history of my country. I'm quite patriotic, and by that I mean I'm proud of some of the achievements of the United Kingdom and some of the people that come from here. I don't mean when I say patriotic, I like to set fire to wheelie bins and try and wheel them into the atrium of hotels in my hometown or in someone else's hometown. I appreciate it's confusing at the moment, and some people seem to think that patriotic means trying to kill refugees, as opposed to trying to find things in the character of your fellow citizens to admire. It's 12:45. It is 12:47, and I wonder what you think the countries of Malaysia, Indonesia, Nigeria and the United Arab Emirates have in common. You remember the caller earlier, or rather the texter earlier, working in university admissions, telling us they were receiving emails from students due to start in September cancelling their applications, something that will have an economic impact if it happened on a large enough scale, but certainly has what you might call a moral impact on the country. Seriously, have a guess. Have a guess at what Malaysia, Indonesia, Nigeria and the United Arab Emirates have done in the last 24 hours. They have sent out alerts to their citizens, warning them of the dangers they might face were they to travel to the United Kingdom. Were they to travel to the United Kingdom in 2024. Particular warnings for people who are visibly Muslim. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Nigeria talked of how the killing of 3 girls in Southport had spawned an anti-immigrant narrative with particular emphasis on Muslim immigrants or persons of colour. Nigerians were warned that the violence has assumed dangerous proportions as evidenced by reported attacks on law enforcement agents and damage to infrastructure. Avoid political processions and protests, rallies or marches, avoid crowded areas and large gatherings, be vigilant and self-aware at all times. So African countries and Asian countries are warning their citizens of the vulgarity and barbarity they may encounter were they to visit Britain. And the vulgarity and barbarity, of course, conducted by and incited by people who like to portray countries in Asia and Africa as being somehow backwards and inferior. Well done, lads. That's a moment, isn't it? Warning their citizens about what we're like now as a country. The land that Nigel built. Tina is in, this, I don't know why, is one of my favourite words of all time. And I don't get the chance to say it very often. Mönchengladbach. Tina is in Mönchengladbach. Tina, what would you like to say?
Oh, thank you, James. It's such an honour to be on. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller, and excellent pronunciation there.
Good. Well, Tina's quite an easy name, really, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go on.
Well, what I'd like to say is that this is all over the news in Europe, all over the news in Germany. It's the first topic on all the news channels, the riots in the UK. And what this is doing, it's ruining Britain's reputation abroad. These thugs are ruining Britain's reputation in the world. Now, I used to live in the UK. I lived in Britain for 7 years when I was young. I went to university in Britain. I worked for the British military for 13 years. I worked for British Airways for 4 years. Gosh. I love Britain. I love Britain more than I love Germany, I must say. It's a beautiful country, wonderful people. And in the 90s, it was such a liberal country, and there was no xenophobia whatsoever, or it certainly wasn't heard. And it's a different country now. And now, to the extent that I must admit that now I wouldn't even want to travel the UK in my German registered car anymore for fear of being attacked. That's how bad it is.
Well, I want to reassure you. I really do. And I don't think that is... you're white, are you, Tina?
Yes, I am.
Then I think you'd be okay for now.
Yeah, but still, there's that thought that remains, and I think what it's doing is, apart from ruining Britain's reputation abroad, it's also doing huge damage to British tourism as well.
Not just tourism, but I mean potentially the jobs market and the university situation as well.
Yes.
I'm going to adopt the role of the defender of British honour.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say it's only been a week. We'll be back to normal before you know it. And the actual numbers of people responsible for the vileness, albeit that there may be people possessed of similarly backwards and bigoted views in much greater numbers, the people prepared to actually set fire to hotels is relatively tiny.
Yes, of course. But this has been brewing for a while.
And 4 million people voted for Nigel Farage's so-called party. So
Yes. But I mean, of course, we have the same problem here, you know, and I don't know if you remember, but like 20 or 30 years ago in East Germany, there was a fire, thugs set fire to accommodation where asylum seekers were living in Hoyerswerda in East Germany.
No, I don't remember that.
And I think one or two people died. I'm not sure now off the top of my head, but I mean, it's not like it's an international problem, unfortunately. But it's just such a shame because Britain is a wonderful country, and what these people are doing is destroying Britain's reputation. And
do you think
it's so sad?
Do you think that the no-go areas that the far right have been lying about for years have now actually sprung up in precisely the areas where the far right have managed to achieve prominence?
Yes, that's probably true.
I wouldn't head to some of these towns on Wednesday where there are warnings that more riots, race riots, vicious pogroms are likely to unfold.
Yes, that's probably true, I suppose, and of course, some of it has to do with economic status and education, but not all of it. And it's very worrying.
Most of the ringleaders and most of the cheerleaders, most of the inciters went to private school. So, I mean, admittedly, they're not going to be anywhere near the scenes of the crimes that they've helped to instigate, and neither will they be visiting any of the incarcerated mugs that fell for their bilious rhetoric in jail when the time comes. But there's certainly no... if it was down to education, then you'd certainly be expecting a few refunds to be on the way to some parents of prominent public figures. Thank you, Tina Mönchengladbach. It is 12:55. Aggie Chambreau, our political correspondent, is with me. There's been a COBRA meeting this morning, I think. What do we know?
Well, after the COBRA meeting, they have talked about, one of the things they talked about was social media companies, and said, Downing Street has said since that COBRA meeting this morning that the action taken by social media companies to tackle misleading and inflammatory material doesn't go far enough.
So Musk has been spreading it himself. It's not just the problem of tackling it. You've got Twitter now owned by someone who has suggested that civil war is inevitable in the United Kingdom.
And indeed letting Tommy Robinson back onto the platform after he was banned, they let him back in. So that was something, as you'd expect, Number 10 wouldn't get into kind of individuals either on Musk or on Tommy Robinson. But they also talked about the Justice Secretary confirming at COBRA there is enough capacity in the prison system. They talked about 24-hour courts being ready to go on that of course being something that was brought in during the 2011 riots when Sir Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions. And they also talked about the definition of far right. In the lobby briefing as well that has happened since that COBRA meeting, they defended not bringing in COBRA earlier. I just mentioned those 2011 riots. In 2011, COBRA was organised. I think those riots broke out on the Saturday. COBRA happened on the Tuesday. So this has taken longer. They defended that, saying, they have had meetings with police, with politicians, and has rejected categorically the idea that the PM is acting too slowly. They also didn't rule out recalling Parliament, but very much the focus at the moment is responding to the disorder, they said. And that was something the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, was saying, that MPs want to be in their constituencies and kind of dealing with this locally at the moment.
Farage, one of the people calling for the recall of Parliament, and yet, of course, when he had the opportunity to ask questions of the Home Secretary last week in the aftermath of the Southport murders, he elected to make little films for social media instead and was nowhere near Westminster or Clacton. Who could possibly have seen that kind of opportunism and self-interest coming? Anything on what might be ahead of us? Anything on some of the warnings about events on Wednesday, events planned for Wednesday?
They're not getting into kind of what could happen, operational events happening in the future, or indeed whether they'd bring in things like water cannons. But kind of talking about Farage there, one of the things he said was talking about this two-tier policing, which has been criticised already by politicians across the spectrum. The PM as well rejected that characterisation.
A race-baiting lie from the king of race-baiting liars.
Well, yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, the PM has said the police are doing an excellent job and absolutely rejecting that.
I mean, here's one from a mother. My son is a police detective in the Met. He has done the riot training and therefore has worked more than 50 of the last 72 hours because of these mindless idiots who've decided to cause chaos in our cities. He's completely exhausted and had received minor injuries and horrendous abuse. Which other profession goes out into our communities to put their life on the line to serve and protect even the same mindless idiots causing the dangers I am just disgusted? There is Tess highlighting precisely what happens when people like Nigel Farage make these comments about our police service, accusing them of bias, just as Suella Braverman did, of course, in the context of those pro-Palestinian marches. Aggie, thank you. Grim pictures, grim images, but same, if you like, the same old song from the same old people. It's coming up to 12:58. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And we will no doubt be returning to this and some, if not all of this territory tomorrow. I don't know where you look at the moment for encouragement, for optimism, for hope even, but it's probably to each other. I'm always reminded of the words of Jo Cox, of course, at this time. There was an early warning of what would happen if we allowed things like that breaking point poster to become part of public discourse, and she talked about us having much more in common than what sets us apart. I look at the people who are turning up en masse to help clean up the messes that have been made by these racists, these fascists, these rioters, call them whatever you prefer. And that's my Britain. That's what makes me feel a frisson of patriotic pride. And I guess we're just left to puzzle what it is that people mean when they talk about wanting their country back and somehow siding with the people currently in the process of setting fire to corners of it. That's it from me for today. We will be doing it again tomorrow morning from 10. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So download the Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now standing in for Sheila Fogarty, it's Vanessa Feltz. 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 It's Vanessa